Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Omni Wizard presenting to you today. What if Harry Potter got the White Lantern ring at age 8 and death itself obeyed him? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived Differently. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, was exactly as small as it sounds. Harry Potter had measured it once, on a Tuesday afternoon, when Dudley had locked him in there for the 4th time that week and he'd had nothing else to do. 4 feet wide, 7 feet long if you didn't count the section where the stairs angled down and turned the ceiling into something that would crack your skull if you forgot about it, which Harry had, repeatedly. A single bear bulb dangled from a wire, a cot that was mostly springs, a broken toy box that Dudley had thrown away 3 years ago, but which lived in Harry's cupboard like a refugee, taking up space and serving no purpose. Harry lay on his cot and stared at the underside of the 3rd stair, which had a knot in the wood that looked like a screaming face if you were in the right mood, and tonight he was absolutely in the right mood. His left eye was swollen, mostly shut. Not because Vernon had hit him. Vernon was too careful for that, too aware of neighbors and their inconvenient tendency to notice things, but because Dudley had elbowed him during dinner, which had caused Harry to spill his glass of water, which had caused Vernon to grab him by the collar and throw him toward the hallway, and Harry had misjudged the doorframe. It had been a very efficient sequence of events. The Dursleys had returned to their roast chicken as though nothing had interrupted it. He pressed 2 fingers to his eye socket and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. It didn't make the pain less, but it made him feel less like crying, and crying was something Harry had stopped doing when he was 6 because it made Aunt Petunia tell him he was ungrateful and made Dudley laugh, which were both things Harry found unbearable. What he found bearable: the dark, the quiet, the space where the Dursleys' noise couldn't reach him. What he didn't find bearable: everything else. He closed his one functioning eye and tried to sleep, and that was when he heard it, not a sound. More like the absence of sound becoming a shape. The air in the cupboard changed, not colder, not warmer, but different, the way the air changes right before lightning, that electric moment where the world holds its breath. Harry opened his eye. The bare bulb was off, he hadn't touched the switch. But there was light anyway, coming from somewhere beneath the floorboard beneath his cot, bleeding up through the crack between 2 planks in a thin, brilliant white line that had no business being any color at all, let alone that color, white like the inside of a star, white like the first second of the universe figuring out what it wanted to be. Harry sat up. He was 8 years old and he'd had strange things happen around him his whole life. Mrs. Figg's roses had bloomed in November when he'd looked at them long enough once. He'd appeared on the school roof when a group of Dudley's friends cornered him in the yard. His hair had grown back overnight after Petunia shaved it. He'd learned to treat strange as a category rather than an alarm, because if he alarmed at every strange thing, he'd never stop alarming. But this was different. This was specific. This was for him. He rolled off the cot, got his knees on the floor. The wood was cold through his too thin pajamas, and worked his fingernails into the gap around the floorboard. It came up more easily than it should have, like it had been waiting for exactly this. Beneath it was an inch of dark space, insulation and grime and an old spider web long since abandoned, and sitting in the middle of it, glowing with that impossible white light, was a ring. Harry reached in and picked it up. It fit his finger before he'd decided to put it there. He watched it settle onto his right index finger and felt, and here was the part Harry would spend years trying to explain and never quite manage. He felt full. Like a glass that had been empty so long it forgot it was a glass, and then someone finally poured something into it. The white light sank into his skin, and he felt every single living thing in the house at once. Vernon's heavy, self-satisfied sleep, Petunia's lighter sleep, restless old dreams chasing her, Dudley, deeply unconscious after too much roast chicken, the spider in the corner of the kitchen, the fern on the windowsill that was slowly dying because Petunia forgot it existed, the birds roosting under the eaves. Every heartbeat, every breath cycle, every small, insistent pulse of life, he could feel all of it like it was music playing in a frequency he'd only just been tuned to hear. It was enormous. It was the least lonely Harry had ever felt. Then someone knocked on the inside of the cupboard door. Harry looked up. The cupboard door was latched from the outside, which meant it couldn't be opening, but it was opening anyway, and the thing that stepped through it was tall, very tall, the kind of tall that required the universe to make special arrangements, and thin more actions continue / next chapter. Chapter 2. The world between worlds. 3 years is a long time when you're 8. It's even longer when you're spending it learning magic. Harry's room above the quill shop became a base camp rather than a home. He was rarely in it long enough for it to feel like either. Mrs. Whitlock, who turned out to be less incurious than she initially appeared, had started leaving toast outside his door in the mornings and pretending she hadn't when he thanked her for it. She had a grandson somewhere who she didn't see often enough. Harry had figured this out by the end of the first week and had stopped wondering why she fed him. The magical world turned out to have a library. Not the Hogwarts library, Harry wouldn't see that for 3 more years, but a public lending library tucked between a potion ingredients shop and a place that sold enchanted mirrors, with a door so narrow you had to go in sideways and shelves that extended, impossibly, for what felt like half a mile in every direction. The librarian was a retired Auror named Bathsheba Cornfoot, who had one eye that tracked normally and one that rotated independently of her head, and who handed Harry his first library card with the words, "You look like trouble," and the manner of someone who found this a point in his favor. Harry read everything: history of magic, potion theory, transfiguration principles, charms, their etymology and their mechanics, the structure of magical Britain, its ministry, its laws, its gaps. He read about the war that had ended when he was 1 year old, about the Dark Lord who'd tried to hollow the world out, about the boy who'd survived the killing curse, read about himself in the third person, with the peculiar experience of discovering that the story everyone else knew about you bore only a passing resemblance to your actual life. He read without a wand. Most of what he read, he couldn't practice in the technical sense. Wand magic requires a wand, and Harry's instincts told him to wait on that particular acquisition, though he couldn't have said why. What he had instead was the ring, and the ring, as Death had promised, was teaching him in its own way. It happened through contact. When Harry was near something living and struggling, a plant, a creature, a person with something wrong inside them that shouldn't be wrong, the ring would respond and Harry would feel it, and the knowledge of what the thing needed would come to him not as information but as understanding, which is different and considerably more useful. He grew things. He fixed things. He learned the difference between life that wanted to continue and life that had reached its natural close, and learned, with the ring's patient guidance, that the second kind deserved exactly as much respect as the first. Death appeared unpredictably. That was the word for it, unpredictable, though death itself, when Harry raised this observation, pointed out with some dignity that it was not unpredictable, but rather unconstrained by schedule, which was not the same thing. It appeared when it had something to say, or when Harry was doing something it found interesting, which, to Harry's private satisfaction, turned out to be quite frequently. By the time Harry was 9, he could make things grow from nothing, could feel illness in a body the way a doctor feels a pulse, could generate the ring's light in quantities ranging from a faint glow sufficient to read by to something that could, theoretically, be seen from several counties away. He didn't use the larger end of that range in populated areas. Not because he was hiding, he wasn't interested in hiding, but because he was, at his core, a person who didn't like making a mess, and light visible from several counties away tends to create a mess. By 10, he'd made something like a life. He knew the shopkeepers. He knew the Gringotts goblins by name, which they found suspicious and then, gradually, flattering. He knew which days the magical library got new acquisitions, and which vendor in the alley sold the best pasties, and which corner of the alley you could sit in on a warm afternoon without being eavesdropped upon. He was, by most meaningful measures, doing fine. He was also, by one important measure, very lonely. It was a gray Thursday in October, 2 months before Harry's 11th birthday, when he walked through Muggle London on his way back from an errand he'd been running for Mrs. Whitlock, a specialized ink available only from a Muggle art supply shop in Bloomsbury, because magical inks came from magical creatures, and this particular recipe called for something mundane, and Mrs. Whitlock was too proud to explain why, and passed a public library. He would have kept walking. He'd been in that library 3 years ago, for other reasons, and the universe had been making a point then that it apparently wished to underline now, because through the window he saw a girl. She was about his age. He'd be 11 in December. She looked like she might be 10 still. Brown hair in a state of structured chaos, round-framed glasses, seated at a table covered in books that she appeared to be processing at the rate of roughly 1 per 10 minutes. She had 3 different colored highlighters arranged in a row by her left hand, which she was using in a system that Harry, even from outside and through glass, could tell was a system she'd invented herself and was very committed to. None of that was why he stopped. He stopped because the ring pulsed. Not the way it pulsed when something was dying, not that particular quality of urgent distress, but a different pulse, the one he'd started to recognize as the ring registering something remarkable, like life encountering itself at an unusual intensity. The girl inside was magical, powerfully, densely, compressively magical, bottled up inside her like carbonation in something that hadn't been opened, pressing against the edges of her from the inside. Harry could feel it from the pavement. It was extraordinary. It was like standing next to a star that thought it was a person. He went inside. She didn't look up when he sat down across from her. She was reading, actually reading, not performing the social act of looking at a book, but genuinely consuming words at a rate that suggested her eyes were in a relationship with the text that excluded all other parties. Harry sat down and waited. 40 seconds. "If you're going to stare at me," she said, still reading, "you could at least tell me why." "You're magical," Harry said. She looked up. Her eyes behind those glasses were brown and extremely sharp, the kind of sharp that notices things and then notices what it noticed, and then files it precisely for future reference. She looked at him with an expression caught between alarm and fascination, with fascination winning. "I beg your pardon," she said very carefully. "Magical, like things happen around you that shouldn't. Books fall off shelves when you're upset. Plants in your room grow faster than they should. Animals follow you." He watched her face. "At least one of those is true. All of them," she said, after a pause in which she'd apparently decided that outright denial was less useful than information gathering. "How did you know?" Harry held up his hand. The ring caught the library's fluorescent light and threw it back wrong, warmer, deeper, like the light had been filtered through something ancient. The girl stared at it. "What is that?" she breathed. "It's called the White Lantern Ring. It lets me feel life, everything alive, how strongly it's alive, what it needs." He put his hand down. "You have more life in you per square inch than anyone I've ever been near. It's like standing next to something about to ignite." She stared at him for another moment, and then she did something he hadn't expected. She pulled out a notebook and opened to a blank page and wrote the date at the top. "Tell me everything," she said. Her name was Hermione Granger. Her parents were dentists. She'd been reading about unexplained phenomena in scientific literature since she was 7 because the unexplained phenomena kept happening to her, and she found ignorance intolerable. She had not yet received a letter from Hogwarts because she wouldn't be 11 until September, and the letter didn't come until the year of your 11th birthday. She would, she calculated, receive hers the following year. Harry told her about magic, about the wizarding world. He did it carefully and in order, the way you explain something to someone who is going to understand it better than you do eventually, and who deserves to have the foundation laid properly. She interrupted him 17 times with questions. Each question was better than the last. "You've been living in the magical world since you were 8, she said. "In Diagon Alley mostly, yes. On your own, mostly." She processed this. "Is that safe?" "Safe enough. I'm harder to hurt than most people. Because of the ring, partly that, partly," he searched for how to say it. "I have an arrangement with death." Hermione's pen stopped. She looked at him over her glasses. "I'm going to need you to expand on that significantly." So he told her about death. He told her about the Hallows, about the story, about the ancient soul business and the pre-existing arrangement. He told her about the life sense and what it felt like and what he could do with it. He told her about the 3 years of reading and learning and the slowly expanding list of things the ring could accomplish when Harry's understanding was sufficient. She listened to all of it without looking away and with the focused receptivity of someone who has been waiting their whole life for information that made sense of things. When he was done, she closed her notebook. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I have approximately 40 follow-up questions, but the most pressing one is, have you eaten? Because it's 2 in the afternoon, and you look like someone who forgot lunch." Harry looked down at himself. He hadn't forgotten lunch so much as deprioritized it, which was a habit left over from Privet Drive that Mrs. Whitlock's toast campaign had only partially addressed. "There's a cafe around the corner," Hermione said, already packing her books with the efficient decisiveness of someone who makes decisions and then immediately acts on them. "My mum gave me money for the bus, but I'd rather walk. Come on." She stood up. Harry sat for a moment, surprised to discover that following someone else's initiative felt unfamiliar and also, unexpectedly, nice. He followed her. The cafe around the corner sold jacket potatoes and tea and had laminated menus with pictures, and Hermione ordered for both of them without asking, because she'd already decided what he'd want and was correct, which Harry found more impressive than alarming. They sat by the window and she asked her 40 questions with the systematic efficiency of someone who has ranked them by importance, and Harry answered them, and they talked until the cafe started filling up with the after-school crowd, and the noise level rose enough that conversation required effort. "I want to see Diagon Alley," Hermione said. "Today, not today. I have to get home by 5 or my mum worries." She paused, folding a napkin with the mechanical precision of someone whose hands need to do something while her mind works. but soon, before Hogwarts. I'll take you, Harry said. I know the way in. Good. She looked at him directly, and in the particular way she had of looking at things, like she was taking an accurate measurement. You don't have any friends, do you? It wasn't cruel. It was the same tone she'd used to note that 2 plus 2 is 4, observational rather than judgmental. Harry looked at his jacket potato and thought about how to answer. I have death, he said. It's not as good as it sounds. Hermione smiled. It changed her whole face. I don't have any either. Friends, I mean, I'm told I'm too much. She said it lightly, in the manner of someone who has been told this often enough to develop a relationship with the observation. Too much reading, too much talking, too much knowing things. Too much sounds right, honestly, Harry said. You're by far the most alive person I've ever been near. Hermione looked startled, and then something settled in her expression, something warm and quietly relieved, like a door opening in a room that had been sealed too long. Right, she said briskly, in the way people say things briskly when they've just felt something they're not yet sure what to do with. We should exchange information. How do I reach you? Do wizards have phones? Some do, I don't. Harry thought. Owls. I don't have an owl. I'll get one, I've been meaning to. He pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket. He always had scrap paper, old habit, and wrote the address of Mrs. Whitlock's boarding house. Write me. She took the address and put it in her bag with the care of someone filing an important document. I will, tomorrow, probably. She stood up and pulled on her coat and was already looking toward the street with the forward momentum of someone in motion. Then she stopped and looked back. Harry, yeah, I'm glad that ring found you, she said. Whatever it is and wherever it came from, I think you needed someone to tell you that you matter. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and went red in the way people go red when they've said something true out loud and found it unexpectedly exposed. Anyway, I'll write. She was out the door before Harry could answer, which was fine because he didn't have an answer ready and needed several minutes to find one. He sat by the window and watched her walk away with her enormous bag and her important purpose, and felt the ring on his finger, warm, steady, humming. Death appeared in the chair across from him, which was empty in the sense that chairs occupied by Death tend to appear empty to everyone who isn't Harry. That, Death said, with the tone of someone making a precise annotation, was interesting. She's extraordinary, Harry said. Yes, she's going to change things considerably. Death looked out the window in the direction Hermione had gone. She and you both, though in different ways. Harry wrapped his hands around his tea. Is she safe? I mean, in general. Nothing about to. She is perfectly healthy and will remain so for the foreseeable future, Death said mildly. I do not comment on futures, as you know. But I can tell you she is not currently of concern to me professionally. Good. Harry drank his tea. I'm going to buy an owl. An excellent decision. Harry bought an owl that afternoon, a small, alert, tawny owl from the magical menagerie in Diagon Alley who chose him with the decisive swoop of a creature who does not waste time on indecision. Harry named her Athena because she'd looked at the astronomy book with an expression that suggested she had opinions on the classical world, and sent the first letter to Hermione Granger that evening with the instruction that Athena would wait for a reply. Athena returned the next morning with a letter 12 pages long. They wrote for a month before Harry took Hermione to Diagon Alley. He'd offered sooner. She'd said she needed to prepare, by which she meant she needed to read everything she could find in Muggle sources about Wizarding Britain, which turned out to be very little and poorly sourced, which she told him in her 5th letter with considerable irritation. He brought her on a Saturday in November. Her parents dropped her in Muggle London with instructions and a mobile phone, and the slightly dazed look of adults who have accepted their child is going to do something they don't fully understand and have opted for trust over argument. Harry met her outside the leaky cauldron. She couldn't see it yet, no letter, not quite activated, and put his hand near the wall and let the ring pulse, and something in that white light reached out and touched the magic already compacted inside Hermione Granger and shook it gently awake. She gasped. She could see the pub. Rude of me doing that without asking, Harry said. Sorry, did it feel weird? It felt like someone took the lid off, she said, and she was staring at the pub with her eyes enormous. Harry, it felt like someone finally took the lid off. He pushed the door open and she walked into the leaky cauldron and stood in the middle of it with all the cloaked figures and the dim lighting and the smell of butter beer, and turned in a slow circle, and her face was doing something Harry had never seen on another person's face before, pure, uncomplicated wonder. He realized he hadn't felt that his first time here. He'd been too busy surviving. He was glad she could feel it properly. He showed her everything. Gringotts, she had opinions about goblin labor rights that the goblins found simultaneously offensive and intellectually interesting. Ollivanders, she pressed her hand to the window the way Harry had, her first time, and gasped again. Flourish and blots, she went quiet inside it in the way that Harry went quiet in it, and they stood in the same aisle reading the backs of books without speaking for 45 minutes, which was, Harry reflected, the most comfortable silence he'd ever been in. He bought her a book about the foundations of charms theory. She tried to insist she'd pay him back. You can pay for lunch, he said. I only have bus money. Then we're even. They had lunch at a small cafe in the alley that sold pumpkin pasties, and she ate half of hers, and gave him the other half with the decisive generosity of someone who has decided this is how things will be and doesn't require discussion. On the way back through the leaky cauldron, they passed through the bar and Harry stopped. There was a man in the corner, not remarkable-looking, middle-aged traveling cloak, nursing a small bottle of something that wasn't butterbeer. Nothing about him would have caught anyone else's attention, but Harry felt it. The ring hummed, differently from how it hummed for Hermione. Not life burning bright, something else. An echo of death that wasn't quite natural, that moved wrong the way a splinter moves wrong inside a wound, present where it shouldn't be. The man looked up. For a fraction of a second, his eyes were not right. There was something behind them, something layered, something ancient and cold and very afraid. Then it was gone, and he was just a man having a drink, who looked away from Harry with the particular carelessness of someone making an effort not to look like they're avoiding looking. Harry kept walking. He didn't say anything to Hermione, who was reading the Charms Theory book while walking and hadn't noticed the exchange. Outside on the pavement, Death appeared beside him. That man, Harry said. Yes, said Death. There's something wrong with him. There's something in him that shouldn't be there. A fragment, Death said, of something that should have died some years ago and didn't quite. It is. Death paused with the particular quality of pause that indicated it was choosing its words for reasons beyond mere precision. An ongoing matter, not yet requiring your attention. Whose fragment? Harry said. Death looked at him, the lightless eyes steady and old. I think you know, it said. Harry thought about the scar on his forehead, which he hadn't thought about in a productive way for 3 years, because there was nothing to be done about it yet. He thought about the story he'd read about himself in the magical library, the Dark Lord who hadn't died completely, who was out there somewhere trying to come back. He thought about the man's eyes and the thing behind them. Quirrell, he said. He'd read the name in the library, Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor at Hogwarts. That's Professor Quirrell. It is, Death confirmed. He's going to be my teacher next year. He is. Harry looked back at the pub door, then he looked at his hand. Should I do something now? What would you do? Harry thought about it carefully. The fragment inside Quirrell, whatever it was, a shard of Voldemort's shattered soul, was parasitic. Wrong. A thing that had broken the natural order by refusing to accept what had happened to it. Harry could feel it pulling against Quirrell's own life, the way a tumor pulls against healthy tissue. But Quirrell himself, Quirrell's own pulse underneath the parasite, was frightened, had been frightened for a long time, was a man who'd made a terrible choice and found himself trapped inside its consequences. Not yet, Harry said. There's time, and he's not hurting anyone right now. He paused, except himself. Death inclined its head. Precisely. Hermione, who had finished the page she was on and looked up to find Harry talking to apparently empty air, said, Are you talking to Death again? Yes, she had processed this fact across several letters and arrived with characteristic efficiency at acceptance. What does it want? Just to point something out, Harry said. Come on, I told you I'd show you the bookshop with the moving maps. She put the book in her bag. They walked. Harry felt the alley's life around him. All those heartbeats, all those breaths, and the threat of Quirrell's wrongness fading as distance grew, and Hermione's extraordinary brightness walking beside him, and the ring on his finger, and thought about how odd it was that the happiest he'd ever been was walking down a magical alley in London at 10 years old, with no parents and no fixed plan and Death for company, and the only real answer he could arrive at was that happiness, apparently, doesn't have prerequisites. You just have to remove everything that was blocking it. The Dursleys had been blocking it. He'd removed them. Everything since had been, in increments, better. Not easy, better. The Saturday before Harry's Hogwarts letter arrived, he already knew it was coming. He'd been watching the magical calendar with the same attention he gave to everything he wanted to understand. He went to Knockturn Alley for the first time. He went because the ring pulled him there. Not literally. The ring didn't have directional GPS. It wasn't that kind of device. But the life sense pulled southeast along the main alley with a quality of distress that he'd learned to read over 3 years as urgency, and he followed it past the point where Diagon Alley's cheerful shopfronts gave way to something narrower and darker, and considerably less cheerful. Knockturn Alley in the late afternoon, was grim in the way of places that have given up trying to be otherwise. The shop sold things Harry recognized from his library reading as illegal, borderline illegal, or deeply inadvisable. The people walking through it moved with the particular speed of those who don't want to be noticed, which had the paradoxical effect of making everyone in the alley look immediately suspicious. Harry walked through it without hurrying, which made him conspicuous in the opposite direction, and followed the pull. He found the source in an alley behind a shop that sold cursed objects. A cat, gray, enormous, elderly, lying against the wall with its breathing shallow and its eyes half closed. Nothing dramatic about it, just a dying animal at the end of its life in a cold alley. Harry crouched beside it. He put his hand on its side and felt the ring's warmth flow down his arm and into the animal and felt clearly and precisely the story of it. 17 years old, which was very old for a cat, which was a life that had been completely and fully lived. The breathing was wrong because a heart was getting tired, not sick, just done. He could fix it. The ring could fix it. He'd fix things more compromised than this. He could push life back into this cat for another few years. He sat with his hand on the cat's side and thought about what death had told him in those first months. The difference between life that wants to continue and life that has reached its natural close. The respect owed to the second. He felt the cat's pulse, felt the oldness of it, the completion, felt the specific quality of a thing winding down gently. "Okay," he said quietly to it. "I'm not going to make you stay. But you don't have to be cold." He let the ring do something smaller instead, just warmth, just comfort. He sat in the back alley of Nocturne Alley with the cat on his lap, keeping it warm and calm, and death appeared beside him as it always did at these moments, and sat, really sat this time, cross-legged on the cobblestones, and they kept the cat company until it was over. Afterward, Harry stayed there for a moment. "Thank you," a voice said. He looked up. A woman stood at the mouth of the alley, ancient, hooded, leaning on a stick that appeared to be more ornamental than functional. Her eyes were sharp and dark and entirely unreadable. "You could hear," Harry said. "I could see." She nodded at the ring. "I know what that is, boy. I know who you are." She studied him. "You chose not to force it to stay. It was done," Harry said. "Most wielders of that kind of power would have fixed it anyway, to prove they could." She tilted her head. "Or they'd have not stopped at all, kept going through the whole alley, putting things right that were ready to be done with." "That's not what it's for," Harry said. The woman was quiet for a moment. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "No," she said, "it isn't." She straightened and turned to go, and said over her shoulder, "I'll be watching your career at Hogwarts with interest, Mr. Potter. I suspect everyone will be." She walked back into Nocturne Alley and disappeared between the dark shop fronts. Harry stood up, brushed off his knees, and looked at Death. "Who was that?" he asked. "Someone who has lived a very long time," Death said, with the tone of someone declining to elaborate, but in a way that communicated that elaboration existed. "Will I see her again?" "Oh, I should think so," Death said. Harry walked back through Nocturne Alley and into Diagon Alley, where the evening was beginning and the shopfronts were lighting up and the familiar heartbeats of the whole humming world surrounded him, and thought about the cat, and the choice he'd made, and how the ring had felt, not frustrated at the limit, but satisfied at the rightness of it. He thought he was beginning, after 3 years, to understand what the ring had actually chosen him for, not to conquer death, to understand it, which was, it turned out, an entirely different thing. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a cold morning in December. Harry sat at the small table in his room at Mrs. Whitlock's, eating toast she'd left outside his door, and opened it with the unhurried calm of someone who already knew the contents. He read it anyway, properly, because it deserved to be read. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry set it down, looked out the window at Diagon Alley in the winter morning, put his hand on the table with the ring visible, just the cool, quiet white of it in the December light. Mrs. Whitlock knocked on his door and opened it without waiting, which she'd started doing around month 4, and Harry had never objected because he found it, quietly, privately, the closest thing to what he imagined having a grandmother felt like. "Let her come," she said. "Yeah." She looked at it on the table. She made a sound, not quite a sniffle, absolutely a sniffle in all the ways that matter. "I knew it would. Your father's generation, they all came through my place at some point. James Potter stayed here for 2 summers. She caught herself. "Not that I knew who you were, of course. Figured it out eventually. Didn't want to make a fuss." Harry looked at her. She was looking at the letter, not him, with the careful, studied neutrality of someone not wanting to presume. "Thank you," Harry said, "for the toast." "Don't know what you're talking about," Mrs. Whitlock said briskly. "Now, I've got contacts at Madame Malkin's and a word I can put in about getting your supplies early. Juan's the tricky one." Ollivander doesn't take appointments, but if you go Tuesday mornings, he's usually Mrs. Whitlock. She stopped. Thank you, Harry said again, and meant it in all the layers the phrase could carry when used by a boy who had grown up without anyone to thank for anything. For 3 years of all of it. She smoothed her robes with both hands. Her eyes, when she looked at him, were doing the thing eyes do when their owner has decided strongly not to cry. You're a good boy, she said. Whatever that ring makes you, you're a good boy first. She turned back to the door. Tuesday mornings, Ollivander's. She left. Harry looked at the letter. He picked up a quill, the magical kind, self-inking. He'd been using them for 2 years and wrote 2 things. The first was his acceptance to Hogwarts. The second was a letter to Hermione Granger, which said, I got mine. Did you get yours? Meet me in Diagon Alley Saturday. I'll buy you a wand. Don't argue about the money. You can argue about everything else. He sent both letters with Athena, who departed with the dignity of an owl who considers 2 separate deliveries well within her professional capacity. Then he sat back and looked out the window and let himself feel, just for a moment, the enormous alive hum of the world around him, every heartbeat in the alley, every bird and plant and person and creature, and let the ring be warm on his finger, and thought about Hogwarts. About the castle he'd read about, its 400 rooms and its moving staircases and its ghosts and its secret passages and its dungeons and its lake. About the teachers, about Quirrell with his parasitic passenger, about Dumbledore, who Harry had read about extensively and thought about carefully informed opinions about that were complicated and not entirely flattering, about the year ahead. The ring pulsed once, warm, bright, certain. Harry smiled. He had 3 years of preparation, the accumulated knowledge of everything in the magical library he could reach, the ring on his finger, and death for backup. Hogwarts, he thought, was not ready for him. He tried to feel sorry about that. He really couldn't manage it. Chapter 3. The letter was a formality. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on the platform at 10:15 because he was the kind of person who arrived early to things he'd been anticipating for 3 years. Platform 9 3/4 was everything the books had described, and one thing they hadn't: loud. Not unpleasantly loud, the noise had texture to it, the specific layered chaos of families in the middle of complicated goodbyes, owls expressing opinions, cats making their feelings known about travel, and somewhere ahead, the engine of the Hogwarts Express building pressure, with a sound like the world's largest kettle coming to a decision. Harry stood near the barrier with his trunk on a trolley, a battered thing he'd bought second-hand from a Diagon Alley market stall and repaired himself over 2 summers, which meant it was structurally sound and looked like it had lived, and Athena's cage on top, and watched everything with the quiet attentiveness he'd developed over 3 years of living in a world he'd had to decode without a guide. He could feel all of them. Every family on the platform, every student, hundreds of life pulses, overlapping and distinct, a crowd's worth of aliveness that the ring registered like an orchestra tuning up. He'd gotten good at filtering it, the way you learn to follow one instrument through a full sound. He was looking for 2 specific signatures. He found the first almost immediately. Hermione's compressed, brilliant, now considerably less compressed magic was hard to miss, like a lighthouse in a harbor full of candles. She was at the far end of the platform with her parents, both of them smiling the way parents smile when their pride and their worry are fighting a public battle, and the pride is winning on a technicality. Her mum had her by the shoulders saying something emphatic. Her dad was struggling with a trunk that was clearly significantly heavier than it looked. Harry pushed his trolley in their direction. Hermione spotted him halfway there, and the expression she made, brief, controlled, but absolutely genuine, was the expression of someone who has been looking forward to something and is relieved to find that it's actually happening. Harry, she turned to her parents. Mum, Dad, this is Harry. I told you about him. The ring boy, her father said immediately, then looked like he regretted the phrasing. The ring boy, Harry confirmed pleasantly and shook their hands. Her mother held his hand a second longer than a handshake required, and looked at him with the specific focused empathy of a woman who has processed her daughter's letters about an 8-year-old living alone in a magical alley and has formed strong opinions that she is currently restraining. You'll look after each other, she said, with the tone of someone making a request that is also a command. Yes, Harry said, simply and without qualification. That seemed to settle something for her. He helped Mr. Granger with the trunk. The ring made physical work considerably more manageable than it had any right to be. The white light channeled into something adjacent to strength, and they got Hermione and her things onto the train with 6 minutes to spare, which Hermione considered cutting it dangerously fine. She'd been on the platform since 9:45. They found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed their things, and Harry sat down facing the direction of travel while Hermione took the window seat and immediately pulled out a book. They were comfortable in the silence of people who have been writing to each other weekly for a year and have already established that proximity doesn't require constant narration. The train pulled out. The platform fell away. London gave way to suburbs, gave way to countryside at the speed of something that travels between worlds without apologizing for the transition. Death appeared in the corner of the compartment with the manner of someone who has taken trains only in the abstract before and finds the specific version of it adequately interesting. Hermione, who had over the course of many letters arrived at an untroubled acceptance of death's existence, acknowledged its presence with a brief nod and returned to her book. "The sorting will be interesting," Death said to no one in particular. "I've been thinking about that," Harry said. "Which house do you want?" Hermione said without looking up. "Does it matter?" She lowered the book 2 inches. "Strategically, number symbolically, enormously. Gryffindor puts you in the tradition of your parents and positions you as the light side's champion, which will please Dumbledore and confirm every expectation people already have. Ravenclaw would be accurate but create confusion. Hufflepuff would make a point. Slytherin would cause a national incident. I know what I want," Harry said. Hermione waited. "I want what's honest," Harry said. "Whatever that is." She looked at him for a moment with that measuring look of hers. Then she went back to her book. "Gryffindor, then," she said. "You're honest to the point of being inconvenient about it. That's their characteristic vice." The compartment door opened, and a round-faced boy looked in with the expression of someone hoping for assistance and prepared for rejection. "Sorry, have you seen a toad? Mine's gone missing. Name's Neville. Neville Longbottom," Harry said. The boy blinked. "Yes, have we met?" "Number I've read about your family. Your grandmother's Augusta Longbottom, right? She testified at the Death Eater trials." Harry moved his trunk over. "Sit down, we'll help you look for the toad." Neville's expression did several things in quick succession and landed on a grateful uncertainty, like someone offered a hand up who hasn't quite decided it won't be pulled away. He sat. His name was Trevor the Toad. Harry reached out with the ring's sense, felt the train, felt its population of students and creatures, felt the toad's small, bewildered pulse 3 compartments forward and pointed. "He's down the hall," Harry said. "Left side, middle compartment, probably under a seat." Neville stared at him. "How? I can feel living things," Harry said. "It's a ring thing, go get him. And come back after if you want, there's room." Neville went and came back 7 minutes later with Trevor secured, and an expression that had migrated from uncertainty to something closer to cautious warmth. He sat down and looked at Harry with the slightly awestruck attention of someone recalibrating their expectations of what a first day of school was going to involve. "You're Harry Potter," Neville said. "Most days," Harry agreed. "The scar, yes." Neville nodded like this confirmed a hypothesis. He looked at the ring, then at Hermione, who was reading, then back at Harry. Are you two friends?" Hermione said from behind her book. "He's the only person I know who doesn't find me too much." "You're exactly the right amount," Neville said, earnestly and apparently without thinking about it, and then went very red. Hermione lowered her book and looked at him with frank assessment, and then smiled in the way she smiled when she'd updated her opinion of something favorably. "I think we're going to get along," she said. By the time the train reached Hogsmeade, their compartment had also acquired a pair of red-haired twins who knocked on the door looking for someone else. Stayed because Harry's ring had caused a brief visible pulse of white light when one of them set off an experimental firecracker in the corridor, and immediately begun cataloging what they referred to as business opportunities, presented by Harry's ability to feel everything alive within a significant radius. "You'd be incredible for pranks," the first twin said. He was Fred. Harry could tell them apart by their pulses, different cadences, same essential frequency, like 2 instruments playing the same song in different keys. "Early warning system. Who's coming, which teacher? I'll consider it on a case-by-case basis," Harry said. Fred grinned. "He'll consider it, George." "Diplomatic," George agreed. "I like him." "We also have a brother in our year," Fred said. "Ron, he'll probably come find you on the platform. We may have told him to look for the kid with the glowing ring." "Subtle," Harry said. "We don't do subtle," they said together and left. Hogwarts at night, seen from the boats across the Black Lake, was the kind of thing that required a person to simply stop and be in it for a moment. Harry had read descriptions. The descriptions were, through no fault of their authors, inadequate. The castle rose out of the dark with every window lit, towers and battlements against a sky that was cloud-dark and enormous, reflected in the lake so that it appeared to float between 2 versions of itself, above and below. The first years sat in their boats in something close to silence and looked at it with the particular quiet of people in the presence of something that doesn't require commentary. Harry looked at it and felt it. The castle was alive in a way he hadn't anticipated. Not the way people or animals were alive, not organic life, but something older and stranger, the accumulated consciousness of 1,000 years of human habitation pressing into the very stone, the magic in the foundations deep and rich and layered like geological strata. The castle had a pulse, slow, ancient bass register. It was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever felt through the ring, and he sat in the boat with his hand on the gunwale and felt it with his eyes half closed and a look on his face that made Hermione, sitting beside him, turn to look at the castle with renewed reverence because whatever Harry was feeling was clearly significant. "What is it?" she whispered. "The castle's alive," Harry said quietly. "Properly, I didn't expect that." She looked at it. "What does it feel like?" He thought about it. "Like an old person who's been in the same house for so long that the house is part of them," he said. "Like it knows things." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she took out her notebook, which she was carrying in her robes because of course she was, and wrote something in the dark by feel. They docked. They filed inside, dripping with lake mist and wide-eyed, and were met by a woman who was exactly what the word professor sounded like. Tall, straight-backed, tartan-robed, with glasses that appeared capable of independent moral judgment. Professor McGonagall looked at the assembled first years with the expression of someone who has performed this exact assessment annually for decades, and finds it annually both exhausting and quietly wonderful. Her gaze snagged on Harry for a fraction of a second longer than the others. He met it. She moved on, but the quality of her attention shifted in a way Harry noted and filed. The Great Hall was astonishing. Harry had expected to be unbothered, having read about it, and found that reading about a ceiling, charmed to reflect the sky and experiencing that ceiling directly, were not the same experience. He looked up at the cloud-dark sky above the enchanted ceiling, at the candles floating through it, and felt the castle's old pulse beneath his feet and the ring warm on his finger, and thought, "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." It was a thought he'd had in increments over 3 years, but never this completely. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool at the front of the hall, old and battered and slightly singed, and when McGonagall placed it there and stepped back, it opened its brim and sang. Harry listened to the whole song. He noticed Dumbledore at the head table. The man was impossible to miss, silver-bearded and bright-eyed and radiating the kind of gravity that very old, very powerful people sometimes radiate when they've been sitting at the center of things for long enough. He was looking at the first years with the attentiveness of someone reading a text he's been waiting to access. His gaze found Harry. Harry looked back. Dumbledore smiled. It reached his eyes, which was interesting, because Harry had read enough about Albus Dumbledore to know that the reaching the eyes version of his smiles was the one deployed for situations of genuine consequence. Harry looked away first, not from discomfort, but because the hat was done singing and McGonagall was starting the list and he wanted to pay attention. He watched the others get sorted. Hermione went to Gryffindor, which surprised no one who'd spent 5 minutes with her. Neville went to Gryffindor after a hat deliberation that lasted nearly a minute, the hat clearly identifying qualities in Neville that Neville himself was not yet aware of. A boy named Ron Weasley, red-haired, freckled, somewhat hurried in his delivery of his own name, as if he'd been practicing and the practice had made him faster rather than calmer, went to Gryffindor with the ease of someone returning to a family habit. Potter Harry, the hall, which had been maintaining the respectful quiet of a room watching something it finds personally relevant, went absolutely still. Harry walked up to the stool. He sat down. McGonagall placed the hat on his head and the brim came down over his eyes and the world went dark, and then the hat spoke directly into his mind in a voice like old leather and something that smelled inexplicably like wood smoke. "Well," it said, "this is new." "Hello," Harry thought back. "I've sorted 12,000 students," the hat said. "Give or take, I have never sat on a head that felt quite like yours. Is that good or bad? It's profound. There's a great deal here. Courage, certainly not recklessness, actual courage, which is the kind that exists after you've considered the cost. Brilliant mind, though you share that platform with several others. Loyalty deep enough to be structural. A pause, and something I don't have a house for. Something the founders didn't anticipate. The ring, Harry thought. Older than the ring. The ring recognized it. The ring didn't create it." The hat was quiet for a moment, and Harry had the strange sensation of being very carefully read, page by page, in the way you read something you know is important and want to understand fully. "You know what you are, don't you? I'm working on it. You know enough." Another pause. "You could be anything. That's not flattery, that's literally true. Any of the 4 houses would have you and be the better for it. Then put me where I'm supposed to be. Supposed to be, the hat echoed with something like amusement. What an interesting way to ask. Harry felt it thinking. You know what, I agree. Where you're supposed to be. It raised its brim. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted in the way that tables erupt when they've been waiting for a particular name and the waiting is over. Harry walked to the table and sat down between Hermione and an empty seat that Ron Weasley would shortly occupy, and the noise continued around him. And across the hall, he felt Dumbledore's attention like a warm hand between his shoulder blades, present, considered, not unwelcome. He glanced up. Dumbledore was watching with an expression that Harry couldn't read entirely from this distance, but which contained, underneath its layers of benign welcome, something that was clearly thinking very hard about what it had just observed. Harry picked up his fork as the food appeared and ate, because the train had been long and he was hungry, and whatever Dumbledore was thinking could wait until tomorrow. Potions was on Thursday. Harry had been looking forward to it for reasons that had nothing to do with potions, and which he saw no reason to announce to anyone. The dungeon classroom was cold in the way of stone rooms that don't get direct sunlight, and smelled of ingredients that had been stewing in the walls for decades. The Gryffindors filed in with the Slytherins, which had apparently been the tradition since the school's founding, and which served the pedagogical function of establishing, very early, that your house would not protect you from exposure to people with different priorities. Harry sat between Hermione and Neville, who had requested this arrangement because he found proximity to both of them stabilizing and was honest enough to say so. Professor Snape entered the classroom the way weather enters a room, all at once, with immediate effect. He was tall and pale and dark-robed, with the kind of presence that fills space without requiring volume, and he moved between the desks with the economy of someone who has been doing this long enough that he's past the point of performing it. He looked at his register. Granger, he said, without looking up. Here, Longbottom. Here, a slight quaver. Potter. He looked up at exactly the same time Harry looked up, and they made eye contact with the particular precision of 2 people whose collision has been written into the structure of events from some distance back. Snape's dark eyes were unreadable in the way of people who have spent decades making them so. Harry's were clear and attentive and entirely unimpressed. Our resident celebrity, Snape said, with the particular intonation that coats something true in acid to change its meaning. He set down the register and moved toward the front of the room, robes settling. Mr. Potter, tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked at him. He felt Hermione's hand move under the desk, the reflex of someone stopping themselves from raising their arm. The draught of living death, Harry said. Though asphodel and wormwood together were used in morning rituals before the potion was formalized, there's some debate in the theoretical literature about whether Galpalot's research on the precursor preparation constitutes a separate compound. The class went quiet in the way classes go quiet when an expected outcome has been replaced by an unexpected one. Snape was still for a moment. His expression didn't change. But something behind it shifted, the barely perceptible adjustment of a man revising a calculation. Where would you look if I told you to find a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It's an antidote to most poisons, though not all. It's ineffective against bloodroot compounds and Galpalot's third law. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Same plant, different names, also called aconite. It's used in wolfsbane potion, which is, incidentally, one of the more impressive achievements in modern potion making given the complexity of the lycanthrope metabolism. The silence that followed was longer this time. Snape looked at Harry with an expression that had crossed out what it expected to find and was determining what to replace it with. You've done your reading, Mr. Potter, he said. 3 years of it, Harry said. I've been living in Diagon Alley since I was 8. Something flickered in Snape's face. The smallest recalculation. He knew enough of Harry's history. Dumbledore ensured key staff knew the relevant background, and the implication of what Harry had just casually stated landed with evident impact. On your own, Snape said, with a flatness that could have meant several different things. Mostly, I had good neighbors. Snape looked at him for another moment, then he turned to the class. What Mr. Potter has demonstrated, he said, in the same acid-edged voice, though the edge had shifted its direction, is preparation. Which most of you, his gaze moved across the room like a searchlight, have demonstrated a conspicuous absence of. He moved to the board. Open your books to page 6. He didn't call on Harry again for the rest of the lesson. But when he moved past Harry's desk 20 minutes in to look at the potion they were preparing, a simple color change solution, orientation exercise, nothing complex, he paused for 2 seconds longer than he paused at any other desk. Harry's was correct. Not approximately correct or technically acceptable. Precisely textbook illustration correct, and also a slightly deeper shade of the target color than the book specified, which was the result of a small modification Harry had reasoned out from reading the ingredient interactions, and which was not wrong but was not the expected variation. Snape said nothing. He moved on. In the corridor after class, Hermione fell into step beside Harry and said, without preamble, he was going to humiliate you. That first question was a trap. He expected you not to know. I know, Harry said. You derailed him completely. I know. He's going to recalibrate. He won't underestimate you again. Good, Harry said. Being underestimated is exhausting. I'd rather be accurately estimated. Hermione smiled at her shoes. That's either very mature or very arrogant. Can it be both? She considered. In your case, probably. Dumbledore called Harry to his office on the second Friday of term. This was not a surprise. Harry had been expecting it, had felt Dumbledore's careful attention since the sorting like a considered question that hadn't yet found its right moment. He went up the spiral stairs behind the gargoyle with Athena on his shoulder, because he'd been taking Athena with him more often since arriving at the castle, and she appeared to find it agreeable, and knocked on the office door. Come in, come in. The office was extraordinary, the most alive room Harry had encountered in the castle, crammed with moving, humming, breathing things. Instruments on every surface. Portraits of past headmasters moving and watching. The phoenix on the perch in the corner lifted its head when Harry entered and made a sound like a single perfect musical note, and Harry felt it through the ring, the phoenix's life, rich and ancient and cyclical, completely unbothered by the concept of death in the way that only things which have died and returned many times can be. Harry looked at it with genuine interest. The phoenix looked back with the tolerant wisdom of a creature that finds most humans endearing and some of them genuinely interesting. He sat down across from Dumbledore without being invited to, because the chair was there, and it was the appropriate thing to do, and waiting to be told to sit down had always struck Harry as a slightly unnecessary submission. Dumbledore, behind his desk, watched this with bright eyes and said nothing about it. Harry, he said, how are you finding Hogwarts? Extraordinary, Harry said honestly. The castle's alive, I felt it on the lake. I hadn't expected that. Dumbledore tilted his head. The castle is indeed more conscious than most of our literature acknowledges. What you felt is the accumulated magic of 1,000 years of habitation pressing into the stone. Most students don't perceive it at all. He looked at Harry's hand, where the ring sat visible on his finger. Most students don't have your advantages. The ring didn't give me the perception, Harry said. It expanded it. I was already picking things up. The ring just made it comprehensive. Ah. Dumbledore made a small, precise sound. You're telling me the ring recognized something that was already there? Yes. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was warm and wise, and also, underneath both, very much doing arithmetic. Harry let him. Harry, Dumbledore said carefully, I want you to know that I am aware of your living situation over the past 3 years. Mrs. Whitlock is known to me. She was kind enough to let me know you were well, which I was relieved, Harry suggested. A pause. Grateful, Dumbledore said, with the slight adjustment of a man who prefers precision. And more than a little surprised. We had arrangements in place. For your protection, your education, the Dursleys, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression did something. The Blood Wards. I understand the Blood Wards, Harry said. The theory is sound. The application required me to be not who I am. He met Dumbledore's eyes. The blue gaze, legendary for its penetrating quality, was looking for something. Harry didn't hide from it. I'm not angry about it. I understand why you made the choices you made. I'd like us to be honest with each other from here, though. Dumbledore studied him for a long, careful moment. You know about the prophecy, he said. The gist of it, Harry said. The power the Dark Lord knows not. I've been thinking about that. Oh, and the tone here was something Harry found genuinely interesting, not condescending, not dismissive, curious. Attentive, the tone of someone who has just realized they are in a conversation with something closer to a peer than they anticipated. Harry held up his hand with the ring. Death defers to me, Harry said. Voldemort has spent his whole life running from death, terror of it. He shattered his own soul 6, 7 times rather than face it. He put his hand down. The power he doesn't know isn't love, exactly. It's that. The willingness to face what he's most afraid of and find it not frightening. He paused. He can't fight that. You can't fight the thing you don't understand. Dumbledore was still. Outside, the phoenix made another sound. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice had shifted, had lost its headmasterly register and found something older and quieter beneath it. I had a plan, a careful, long-built plan. which you have in 3 years of independent action and 1 week of being present in this castle, rendered significantly more flexible. Is that all right? A pause. It is unexpected, Dumbledore said. That's not the same thing, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. And then slowly, genuinely, reaching his eyes completely, he smiled. No, he said, it isn't. He reached for the bowl of sweets on his desk and offered it across. Harry took one, lemon sherbet. They sat together in the most alive office in Hogwarts, with the portraits watching and the instruments humming and the Phoenix making the occasional musical observation, and talked, really talked, for the better part of 2 hours. And by the end of it, Dumbledore had revised his plans in ways he would spend the rest of the evening working through, and Harry had acquired an ally who was complicated and powerful and not entirely trusted, but was at least finally being honest. Which was all Harry had ever asked of anyone. He went back to Gryffindor Tower in the dark, with Athena on his shoulder and Death walking beside him through the empty corridors, and the castle's old pulse under his feet, and the ring warm and steady on his finger. Well, Death said. He's brilliant, Harry said, and he had me as a chess piece for 10 years and he's only just realizing the piece has opinions. How does that feel? Harry thought about it. Like the game just got more interesting, he said. He walked through the portrait hole into the common room, where Hermione was still up, reading by the fire, and Ron Weasley was asleep in the armchair across from her with a half-eaten chocolate frog on his chest, and Neville had fallen asleep at the table over his herbology homework with his quill still in his hand. Harry sat down on the hearthrug, and Athena moved from his shoulder to the back of the chair, and the fire crackled, and the common room breathed, and the castle held them all in its ancient living stone. How was Dumbledore? Hermione asked, without looking up. Smarter than I expected, Harry said. More honest than I hoped, less in control of things than he thinks. That's very charitable. I'm working on charity, Harry said. It's the one I'm least naturally good at. Hermione looked up at him over her book. You're better at it than you think, she said, with the frankness she brought to everything. Then she went back to reading, and the fire crackled, and somewhere above them in the tower the other Gryffindors slept, and Hogwarts breathed around them all with its great, slow, ancient pulse. Harry closed his eyes and felt it, all of it, every heartbeat. Every sleeping student, every alert professor, every ghost drifting through the walls with their dim, persistent echoes of life. Deep beneath the castle, the grounds, the lake, the giant squid's enormous contemplative pulse, the forbidden forest's dense tangle of life and death in constant cycling commerce. And somewhere in the castle, walled and guarded in a room that smelled of old magic and something Harry recognized as the kind of magic that doesn't want to be found, a something behind a door on the third-floor corridor. Not just something, something being protected. Something that Quirrell, whose wrongness Harry could feel even now, 2 floors up and half the castle away, like a splinter his sense couldn't stop finding, was here to steal. Harry opened his eyes. Hermione, he said. What do you know about the Philosopher's Stone? She looked up. The fire crackled. Outside, the grounds lay dark and still, and the stars were out, and somewhere between here and there the year was accelerating toward the thing it had always been moving toward, and Harry Potter sat in the firelight with the ring on his finger and the patience of someone who already knows how the story ends. He just needed to decide how. Chapter 4. What Darkness Looks Like in the Light. The third-floor corridor had a sign on it that said students were not to enter unless they wished to die painfully, which Harry thought was an admirably direct piece of communication from a headmaster who usually preferred layers. He'd walked past it 6 times in the first 3 weeks of term, not trying to get in, just walking past, feeling the door with the ring sense the way you'd probe a sore tooth with your tongue, mapping the shape of what was behind it. The stone was in there. He could feel it, not the stone itself, which was an object and had no life to speak of, but the protections around it, which were alive in various ways. The 3-headed dog's enormous triple pulse was the most obvious, a bass-note warmth of animal life, suspicious and alert, pressing against the other side of the door like a truck idling in a tunnel. There were other protections deeper in. He could feel them in outline rather than detail, the way you feel the shape of a building from the outside, the sharp, specific cold of something transfigured, the damp green life hum of plants that weren't meant to be touched, a magical logic problem that had no biological component and registered as nothing through the ring at all. He wasn't going in yet. He had no reason to go in yet. What he was doing was learning the shape of the problem, because in Harry's experience, the problems you understand completely are the ones you can solve without making a mess. He hated making a mess. Hermione, when he'd told her about the stone, about Quirrell, about what he suspected was happening and why, had done the thing she did with large amounts of alarming information, which was to process it very quickly and then become extremely organized about it. She'd filled 4 pages of notes within the hour. She'd cross-referenced everything she'd read about Nicholas Flamel, the stone's history, Voldemort's known attempts at resurrection, and Quirrell's academic record, which she'd located in a history of Hogwarts faculty that most people wouldn't have known to look for. She'd handed Harry the notes with the manner of someone submitting a report and then said, "So what are we doing?" "Watching," Harry said. "For how long?" "Until something moves." Ron brought into the picture 2 days later because he'd noticed Harry and Hermione whispering and had the straightforward directness to simply ask what they were on about, had a more immediate response. "We should tell Dumbledore," he said. "Dumbledore knows," Harry said. Ron frowned. "Then why hasn't he done something?" "Because he's waiting for Voldemort to make a move," Harry said. "The stone is bait as much as it's an asset. Dumbledore wants to know who's after it and how. That seems like a terrible plan." "It's a reasonable plan if you're willing to risk the stone," Harry said. "Dumbledore's calculus is that the stone is replaceable and the information isn't. Is he right?" Harry thought about Quirrell's wrongness, the fragment of Voldemort's soul wrapped around the professor's life like a parasite. Thought about the man's fear, genuine, constant, the fear of someone who'd made a choice they couldn't unmake and was living in the consequences of it every day. "He's not entirely wrong," Harry said, "but he's not accounting for all the variables." "Meaning us," Ron said. "Meaning me," Harry said, and said it without ego, just as a fact. "Voldemort and I have a pre-existing arrangement with death that makes our encounter significant. Dumbledore is treating the stone as the central object. It's not." "I am." Ron was quiet for a moment, processing this with the practical intelligence he tended to apply to things once he'd decided to take them seriously. "Right," he said. "So we let it play out and you handle the end of it. That's the plan." "That's not much of a plan." "I know," Harry said, "but sometimes the cleanest path is just being there when the thing happens." The thing with Quirrell escalated in November when Harry noticed the professor's wrongness intensify. Not louder exactly, more active, the way an infection activates when something in the body gives it an opportunity. Quirrell was pushing more urgently against the stone's protections, probing them during the nights, though apparently not yet successfully breaching them. Harry knew this because the three-headed dog's pulse remained steady and undisturbed, which meant the door was still closed. He told Dumbledore, partly because it was the right thing to do, and partly because he wanted to watch Dumbledore respond to information arriving by a route he hadn't planned for. Dumbledore's eyes had done something interesting when Harry described the life pulse of Quirrell's possession. Not surprise, Dumbledore was past being surprised by things he already suspected. More like the careful recalculation of someone adjusting a model when new data arrives with greater precision than the model expected. "You can feel the nature of the possession," Dumbledore said. "A fragment," Harry confirmed, "not a whole person, something broken off and latched on. It's parasitic, it's consuming Quirrell from the inside, not fast but consistently." He paused. "He's frightened. Quirrell, I mean. What's in him is cold, but the man himself is terrified." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You have a great deal of compassion," he said, "for a man who will try to kill you before the year is out." "People who try to kill you because they're terrified are different from people who do it because they want to," Harry said. "It doesn't make it acceptable. It makes it comprehensible." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at him. "Harry, I must ask when the time comes. Do you?" "I'll handle it," Harry said. "That's what concerns me slightly." "I know." Harry stood up from the chair, the familiar chair, the one he'd occupied 6 times now across the term, each visit reshaping the dynamic between them incrementally toward something that was no longer headmaster and student and wasn't yet equals but was moving through the space between. "But it's the right answer anyway." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in his eyes was something that wasn't quite worry, something more complex, the feeling of a very old man watching something very new and being unable to determine whether it required his protection or whether that offer was, in this particular case, beside the point. "Be careful," he said. "I'm always careful," Harry said. "I just don't look it." The Mirror of Erised appeared in Harry's life on a sleepless night in December, 2 weeks before the Christmas holidays. He'd been walking the castle at More Actions Continue / Next Chapter Chapter 5. The Chamber Knows Your Name. The summer came and went the way summers do when you have somewhere to be, quickly, and with the specific quality of time that knows it's between things. Harry spent it in Diagon Alley. Mrs. Whitlock had left his room exactly as it was, which he hadn't asked her to do and she hadn't mentioned doing, which was the language they'd developed for things that mattered but were better expressed through action than discussion. He slept late, read later, walked the alley in the mornings when it was quiet and the shopkeepers were setting out their displays, and the whole place had the particular calm of a world that hasn't been asked anything yet today. Hermione wrote every week. Ron wrote less frequently but more entertainingly. His letters had a conversational sprawl to them, like talking to someone who's thinking out loud, full of observations about Quidditch and his brothers and his mother's cooking, and the occasional very astute political observation sandwiched between two jokes, which was the Ron Weasley method of demonstrating that he was paying attention to the world without performing seriousness about it. Neville wrote once in July, very formally, to invite Harry to his grandmother's house for a fortnight. Harry went. Augusta Longbottom was exactly what Harry had expected from everything he'd read and heard about her: formidable, exacting, privately very warm in the way of people who show warmth through expectation rather than softness. She treated Harry with a specific kind of respect that had nothing to do with his fame, and everything to do with the fact that he'd looked her grandson in the eye on the first day of school and made room for him. Neville, that fortnight, showed Harry his greenhouse. It was extraordinary. Neville had 24 plants in various states of cultivation, several of them rare, all of them impeccably kept, not the nervous, hesitant Neville of Potions class, but someone entirely different, someone competent and assured and articulate in the way of people talking about things they genuinely love. Harry spent 4 hours in that greenhouse, the ring giving him the vivid biological experience of every plant in the space, and learned more about herbology than he'd absorbed from 6 months of books. "You're brilliant at this," Harry said. Neville looked at him like someone trying to detect sarcasm and not finding any. "I'm not brilliant at, plants are just." "You're brilliant at this," Harry said again, with the quiet finality he used for things he considered settled. "You understand them, what they need, what they're doing. That's not common." Neville was quiet for a moment, turning a pot of mandrake seedlings in his hands with the automatic care of someone for whom the motion has become reflex. "Gran wants me to be an Auror," he said. "What do you want?" A pause. "This," Neville said. "But it's not exactly. The person who understands plants like you do is the person who will win every fight that happens near them," Harry said. "Herbology and combat are not as separate as people think. I've been reading about it." Neville looked at him. Then he looked at his greenhouse. Then he did something Harry had learned to watch for: a small, private settling, a decision being made in the quiet, internal way. "I've been reading about it too," Neville said. "Actually, tell me what you found," Harry said. They talked for 2 more hours. Augusta watched them through the greenhouse window from the kitchen and made an expression that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite smiling but lived in the overlap. The diary arrived at Hogwarts in September, tucked inside Ginny Weasley's second-hand copy of A Thousand Magical Herbs and Fungi, which had been purchased from Flourish and Blotts at the start of the school year, in the middle of a tremendous argument between Arthur Weasley and Lucius Malfoy that Harry had witnessed from 3 rows of shelving away, and had found illuminating in approximately 17 ways. Harry had felt Malfoy slip it in. He'd been reaching for a book on the upper shelf, ring on his finger, full life sense operating, when the specific wrongness of the diary registered, not the same wrongness as Quirrell's fragment, but recognizably related. A similar cold. A similar quality of something that should have died refusing to do so. He'd felt Malfoy's hand in Ginny's cauldron of books and felt the cold thing change location and known, with the ring's absolute clarity, what had just happened. He'd watched Malfoy Sr. straighten up and smile his particular smile, the smile of someone who has just moved a piece on a board and is satisfied with the positioning, and felt a very specific anger that he filed carefully for later use. He hadn't taken the diary immediately. He'd considered it, the question of whether to intervene before the problem started or to wait and understand it more fully, and had decided that understanding it first would cost nothing he wasn't willing to pay. That turned out to be an error in calculation, not a devastating one, but real. He hadn't anticipated Ginny. The first attack happened in October. Mrs. Norris found petrified in a corridor with water on the floor and a message on the wall written in what appeared to be blood. "The chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Harry, Hermione, and Ron had been coming back from the Death Day party for nearly Headless Nick, an event Harry had attended out of genuine interest in the social dynamics of ghosts, and which had been extraordinary in ways he was still processing, and found the scene at the same time as approximately 50 other students pouring out of the Great Hall. Filch was beside himself with grief and fury. Dumbledore was already present. The teachers sealed the corridor. Harry stood in the crowd and looked at Mrs. Norris and felt the ring tell him what had happened. Not dead, petrified. Frozen at the edge of death, the life suspended rather than ended, like a clock stopped rather than broken. He reached out and touched Filch's arm just lightly, just to let the ring assess, and felt the man's anguish, which was genuine and deep and not at all the emotion Harry would have expected from a man universally regarded as having no particular warmth. He thought, everyone loves something, even the people you'd be surprised by. He said nothing. The scene wasn't his to manage, and Dumbledore was already doing what needed doing. Harry looked at the message on the wall instead, and read it, and thought about Tom Riddle's diary in Ginny Weasley's bag, and thought about what the Chamber of Secrets actually was. He knew, from his reading, the Founders, Salazar Slytherin's hidden room. The monster, the line of Parselmouths. He looked at the message and said very quietly, so only Hermione beside him could hear, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "Lucius Malfoy put something in Ginny's bag at Flourish and Blotts," he said. "A diary. I felt it, same wrongness as Quirrell. It's another fragment of Voldemort." Hermione's intake of breath was very small and very controlled. "You didn't. I should have taken it then. I know. Why didn't you?" "I thought I had time to understand it better first." He watched Dumbledore directing the teachers. "I was wrong. The diary isn't just a fragment, it's a trap, a long game. Whoever's using Ginny through it is doing it slowly. We need to get the diary," Hermione said. "Yes, how? I'll talk to Ginny." Hermione looked at him with the expression she used for plans that were correct but also more complicated than they appeared. "She's 11 and being slowly possessed by a fragment of Voldemort. She's probably terrified and ashamed and has no idea what's happening to her." "I know," Harry said, "which is why I'm going to talk to her and not demand." He found her in the library 2 days later, sitting alone at a table with the diary open in front of her. She was writing in it, and here was the thing Harry hadn't anticipated, the thing that changed his understanding of how the trap worked. Her expression while she wrote was not fear. It was relief. The careful, private relief of someone who has found somewhere that listens. He sat down across from her. She startled, tried to close the diary, froze when she saw who it was. "It's all right," Harry said. "I wasn't. This is just a Ginny," he said, and his voice was the version of his voice he used for things that needed to be gentle first. "How long have you been writing in it?" She looked at the diary. Her hands were on either side of it, not quite covering it, not quite letting go. She was small for her age, red-haired, with her mother's face and her father's earnestness, and she looked like someone carrying something considerably too heavy and doing it quietly because she didn't know there was another option. "Since school started," she said. "Does it write back?" She looked up at him very quickly, the look of someone who has just realized that they are known and don't know whether that is safe. "Yes," she said in a very small voice. "What does it say to you?" Her hands tightened on the diary's edges. "Kind things, mostly. It asks about how I'm feeling, what I think about. It says," she stopped. "It says it understands me. It's very good at that," Harry said. "It's had a long time to practice." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" "The diary belongs to a boy named Tom Riddle," Harry said. "He wrote in it 50 years ago, and he put something of himself into it, a piece of his thoughts, his will, his intentions, so that it could go on after him." He kept his voice very level, very calm. "Tom Riddle grew up to become Lord Voldemort. The silence that fell was the particular silence of something irrevocable landing." Ginny's face went through several things: denial, recognition, horror, the particular devastated horror of someone realizing that the thing that felt like friendship was constructed to feel exactly that way. "No," she said. "Yes," Harry said gently. "It's not your fault. It's designed to find lonely people and be exactly what they need. You couldn't have known." I told him." She pressed her hands over her face. "I told him everything, my whole everything." "I know." Harry looked at the diary. "Ginny, has there been periods you can't account for, when you wake up somewhere and you don't remember getting there?" Her hands came down. Her eyes, over her fingers, were very wide. "Yes," she whispered. "That's him, the fragment in the diary. It's been borrowing your body when you're not, when you're asleep, or writing to it for a long time. It's been using your energy to do the things that have been happening." "Mrs. Norris," she said. "Yes. I wrote the..." She looked at the wall where the message wasn't anymore, where the blood writing had been. "I didn't know. I woke up in the corridor and my hands were, and I didn't remember." She stopped talking. She was shaking, very slightly, with the specific tremor of someone trying very hard to hold something in. Harry reached across the table and put his hand on the diary. The ring's light went through it, and the diary screamed. Not a human sound. A cold, structural scream, the scream of something made of will and ambition encountering something it cannot resist. Harry felt the fragment in it thrash against the lifelight the way the fragment in Quirrell had thrashed, and he pressed his palm flat against the cover and let the ring pour through steadily, and the diary fought him for a long moment, shook under his hand, the pages fluttering open and closed as if in wind, and then went still, completely still. The cold was gone. Harry lifted his hand. The diary was just a diary now, an old blank-paged book, nothing in it. He could feel the emptiness where the fragment had been, the vacuum left by something violently removed. He pushed it across the table to Ginny. She looked at it for a long time. "Is he gone?" she said. "From this," Harry said. "He's scattered again. He'll be more fragmented, weaker, but he'll try to find a way back." "Because of me," she said. "No," Harry said firmly. "Because of Lucius Malfoy, who put the diary in your bag with full knowledge of what it was and what it would do. Because of Voldemort, who made himself into this." He waited until she looked at him. "You were used. There's no shame in being targeted. The shame belongs to the people who targeted you." Ginny Weasley looked at him across the library table, this boy who was supposed to be a legend, and was instead sitting across from her talking about things that actually mattered, and her face crumpled, just briefly, just once, and then she pulled herself together with the specific competent resilience of someone who has 5 older brothers and has had to be tougher than expected for a very long time. "My mum is going to be so upset," she said. "Your mum is going to be upset that it happened," Harry said. "Not at you." "How do you know?" "I've met your mum," Harry said, very briefly, at Flourish and Blots. "She struck me as someone whose upset moves toward the cause and not the victim." Ginny considered this. Then she pushed the diary across the table further toward him. "You should keep this, or destroy it, or I don't want it." "I'll give it to Dumbledore," Harry said, "and I'm going to tell him about Malfoy." Something hardened in Ginny's face. Not a childish hardening, something older, something decided. "Good," she said. The second attack happened 3 weeks later. Colin Creevey, found petrified on the stairs with his camera in his hand, the film inside exposed to something that had burned the image it had captured. Justin Finch-Fletchley, and nearly headless Nick a week after that. The castle tightened like a fist around itself, the cheerful chaos of term becoming something more careful and suspicious. Harry told Dumbledore about Malfoy within the week, sat in the office and laid it out with the directness he always brought to Dumbledore, what he'd felt, what the ring had registered, the cold wrongness of the diary, and when it had transferred hands, and why he hadn't acted immediately, and the calculation error that had resulted. Dumbledore listened to the whole account without interrupting. "Lucius Malfoy," he said when Harry was done. "Yes, deliberately, he knew what the diary was. This will be difficult to prove." "I know," Harry said, "but I can testify to what I felt. The ring's perception is it's not interpretive. I don't see things, I feel them. The diary had the same quality as Quirrell's possession, the same source." Dumbledore was quiet, fingers pressed together, looking at nothing in particular. "There are 6, he said, very quietly, almost to himself. "Horcruxes," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. "I've been reading about dark magic theory," Harry said. "The soul and its fragmentation." Slughorn's memory from 1943 is presumably in your pensive if you ever got hold of it. The answers in the etymology, Horcrux, from the Latin hora and the Old French crux, time and suffering. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. "You continue," he said with a specific quality, "to be several steps ahead of where I expect to find you." "The diary's destroyed," Harry said. "That's one. There are more somewhere. I can find them. The ring can feel that particular wrongness from a significant distance if I know what I'm looking for now." He paused. "I'd like your help with the research. You know more of the locations than you've said." Another long pause, longer this time. "You know I've been keeping things from you," Dumbledore said, not a question. "Yes," Harry said. "You were going to manage this slowly. Protect me from things until you needed me for them." He kept his voice even. "I understand why. I'm not angry about it, but it's not necessary anymore, and it's slower." Dumbledore took off his glasses. He rubbed them with his robe in the way of someone doing something mechanical while they think. He put them back on. "The locket," he said. "Slytherin's locket. I believe it's in a cave on the coast, a place Voldemort used as a child where he terrorized other orphans. There's a basin of potion and an inferi-filled lake." He paused. "The ring, another Horcrux. The gaunt ring, with the resurrection stone set into it in a ruined house in Little Hangleton." "That's 2, Harry said. "Plus the diary, 3 found. There is almost certainly a cup," Dumbledore said. "Helga Hufflepuff's, I believe, in the Lestrange's vault at Gringotts. A snake, Nagini, his familiar, made into a living Horcrux much later, and something at Hogwarts." Harry thought about the castle's pulse, about the rooms he'd felt and not fully understood. "Something in the room of requirement," he said. Dumbledore looked at him. "I can feel it," Harry said, "when I walk past the 7th floor. A cold pocket in the castle's warmth. It's been there since September, but I didn't know what I was feeling." He paused. "There's a diadem, Ravenclaw's diadem," Dumbledore said very quietly. "Lost for 1,000 years. Not lost," Harry said. "Hidden." They looked at each other across the desk. "And there is a 7th," Dumbledore said. His voice had changed, had found a register below all its usual ones, the register of something that has weight, one that Voldemort did not intend, when he created by accident the night he killed your parents. Harry went still. He felt it before the words came, felt his own pulse, felt the ring on his finger, felt a connection that was not the ring, that lived underneath the ring, that the ring had recognized when it chose him. A piece of something cold in him that he'd been aware of the way you're aware of a word on the tip of your tongue, present and not quite accessible. Me, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. The office was very quiet. The instruments hummed. The phoenix made no sound. You were going to ask me to die, Harry said. That was the plan, the part you hadn't told me. Walk into his killing curse, destroy the piece of him inside me, let him. It was the only option I could see, Dumbledore said, and his voice was as bare as Harry had ever heard it, stripped of its warmth and its wisdom and everything it used as furniture, down to the room underneath. I'm sorry. I know you are, Harry said. There's another way, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with something desperate underneath the hope. The ring can remove it. Harry looked at his hand. He thought about what the ring was, what it did, life in its purest form, and the Horcrux inside him was the opposite of that, a fragment of death-averse, desperate non-life pressed into him by accident. He thought about what he'd done to the diary, to Quirrell's fragment. He reached inside himself with the ring's sense, carefully, the way you handle something that needs careful handling, and found it. Small, cold, pressed against the scar tissue of his forehead like something that had been there so long it had learned his shape. A fragment of a soul that hated its own existence, that had been terrified and broken and pressed into a child's skull and had been trapped there for 11 years. He felt something he hadn't expected to feel, pity, not for Voldemort exactly. For the fragment, for the piece of Tom Riddle that was in him, separate from the rest of Riddle's broken, scattered will, isolated and unable to develop or choose or change, just cold and frightened and present. I have to be careful, Harry said. It's been in me for 11 years. It's woven in around the scar tissue. He closed his eyes. I can do it, but not today. I need to understand the exact structure first. Of course, Dumbledore said. Of course, there's time, Harry, there's time. Is there, Harry said and opened his eyes. Dumbledore looked at him and something in his face answered the question honestly. There is more time than there was, Dumbledore said carefully, when I believed the old plan was the only one. The basilisk came in February. Harry had been thinking it would come sooner, had been watching the drain of Myrtle's bathroom, which was, the ring had told him the first time he walked past it in October, the entrance to a place very old and very cold and occupied by something living that was unlike anything else in the castle. He'd been tracking the basilisk's movements through the pipes by its pulse, reptilian, enormous, slow, genuinely ancient. It was not malevolent in the way people think of malevolence. It was a creature following the last instructions it had been given by someone 500 years dead, instructions currently being reissued, through the diary, by the echo of its original master. Except the diary was gone, so when the instructions came anyway, when Harry felt the basilisk begin to move with new purpose through the pipes, responding to something Harry had missed, he understood that the chamber had a secondary mechanism he hadn't accounted for. He went to Hermione. She was in the library, which was where she was when she was worried. She worried through research, which meant that during periods of stress, she could be found surrounded by increasingly tall stacks of books, working through them with systematic intensity. The table she was occupying had 8 books open simultaneously, and she was cross-referencing between them with 3 bookmarks and a system of colored sticky notes that she had invented herself. Hermione, he said. Just a minute, she stopped. She looked up, she read his face. What happened? The basilisk is moving, he said. It shouldn't be, the diary is destroyed, but it's moving with intention. She stood up. Someone else. There must be another Parselmouth or another method of control. She began closing books in a rapid, organized sequence. Where is it going? Harry felt the basilisk's enormous slow pulse threading through the pipes below them. Down, he said. It's going further down, into the chamber itself. He paused. There's something else down there. Someone, a very faint. He stopped. It hit him like cold water. Ginny, he said. What? Ginny's down there. I can feel her. It's very faint. It's barely. He was already moving. She's dying, Hermione. They ran, the bathroom, the flooded floor, moaning Myrtle watching from the U-bend with the interested expression of a ghost who finds other people's crises more bearable than her own. Harry hissed the Parseltongue at the tap. He'd known about the Parseltongue since the summer before second year. Another thing the fragment inside him had been leaking into his understanding, which he'd found both useful and slightly irritating, and the entrance opened. You can speak Parseltongue. Hermione said, in the voice she used for things she was filing rapidly without fully processing. Since last year, Harry said. The scar, I'll explain later. You'll explain now, please, while we go. He explained while they descended. The pipe, the stone slide, the dark tunnel that reeked of cold water and extreme age. He told her about the Horcrux in his scar as they moved through the tunnel past shed serpent skins that were larger than they had any right to be, Hermione's wand lit, Harry's ring providing its own white light. She processed it in real time, which was a talent very few people had, and Hermione had more completely than anyone. You've known since October, she said. September, technically. I talked to Dumbledore about it in October. And you didn't tell me. I was deciding how. She made a sound that wasn't quite irritation but lived next to it. Harry, I'm telling you now. Under school in a basilisk tunnel is a suboptimal location for this conversation. I know, I'm sorry. A pause in which she navigated around a particularly large chunk of fallen stone. Okay, she said. We'll discuss it properly later. What do we need to know about the basilisk? It kills with direct eye contact. Indirect is only petrifying. That's why all the victims survived. They all saw it through something. Its venom is one of the most lethal substances known, and its tears are the only antidote. Harry paused. I can feel it. It's in the chamber proper, which is ahead of us. Ginny is with it. And you're going to walk into a room with a 1,000-year-old killing snake with no wand. I have the ring. The ring gives you mastery of life and death, not immunity to basilisk fangs. I'll be careful about the fangs. Harry, Hermione. He stopped walking and turned to look at her, and she stopped too in the low-lit dark of the tunnel, with her wand casting shadows and the ring making the shadows warm rather than cold. I know what I'm doing. She looked at him in the way she'd looked at him since that first day in the library, not the measuring look of assessment, but the different look that came after assessment had been completed and arrived at a result. The look that meant, I know. I know you do, I still worry. I know you do, she said. I still worry. I know, he said. They went on. The Chamber of Secrets was beautiful in the way of things, made by someone with genuine aesthetic conviction and extremely troubling priorities. The pillars carved with intertwined serpents rising to a ceiling lost in darkness, the floor damp with the same cold water that had been seeping in for a century, the green light emanating from no visible source, all of it composed with the specific grandiosity of someone who wanted the space to communicate power before a single word was spoken. Ginny was on the floor near the far end, near the statue of Slytherin himself. Harry felt her before he saw her, the life pulse barely registering, thin as a thread. Her skin was gray-pale, and her eyes were closed, and she was breathing in the shallow, irregular way of someone whose body has been running on the diminishing reserves of energy that something else had been taking from her for months. The basilisk was coiled around the base of the statue. It was enormous in the way that requires renegotiating your definition of enormous after you've used it for things that were merely very large. Its scales were black-green and caught the ambient light in shifting patterns, and its eyes, the lethal ones, were half-lidded, nearly closed, the basilisk at rest but not asleep. It raised its head when Harry walked into the chamber and fixed him with a gaze that it kept deliberately indirect, which was instinctual behavior. The basilisk was listening to commands, and the current command was apparently not immediate lethality, because someone was issuing commands. The boy stood between Harry and Ginny, tall, dark-haired, handsome in the particular careful way of someone who has built their appearance as a deliberate instrument. He had Ginny's robes, no, he had Ginny's energy. Harry could see it, could feel the drain, the life flowing out of Ginny's pulse and into this figure who was becoming more solid, more present, more real the less real Ginny became. Tom Riddle. 16 years old, growing more substantial by the minute. He looked at Harry with the red eyes that weren't quite right yet, still flickering between dark and red as the energy he was drawing solidified him, and smiled the smile of someone who has been waiting for this confrontation since he first heard that Harry Potter was at Hogwarts. Harry Potter, he said. At last. Tom, Harry said. The smile fractured for a fraction of a second. You did that at Quirrell's, the memory said. Called me by that name, it won't work. What won't work? Whatever you're doing, the psychological approach. The making me into a person to be understood. Tom moved between the pillars with the ease of someone who considers the space theirs. I'm a memory, Potter. A preserved echo of the most brilliant student Hogwarts ever produced at the peak of my intelligence and before I made the choices that made you what you are now, Harry said. Scattered, terrified, borrowing a dying 11-year-old's life force because you don't have your own. He walked forward, moving toward Ginny, and didn't stop walking. Move the basilisk, will do what you tell it, Harry said, still walking, until it doesn't, and it's not going to take much. He crouched beside Ginny. put his hand on her forehead, felt the drain, the active, deliberate pull of the memory taking from her, and put the ring between the pull and its source like a wall. Tom staggered. The drain stopped. He regained himself quickly, more quickly than Harry had expected, the 16-year-old memory having significantly more coherence and control than the Quirrell fragment, and his expression moved from surprise to cold fury. "Let go," he said. "You'll kill her faster that way. The transfer can't be interrupted cleanly." "You're lying," Harry said, keeping his hand on Ginny's forehead, keeping the ring between them. He could feel the lie. The life pulse said one thing and Tom's words said another, and the ring didn't care about words. "You're losing cohesion. That's what you're worried about, not her." Tom looked at him with the red flickering eyes, and in them Harry saw the same thing he'd seen in Quirrell's room, the terror underneath everything else. The same terror, just younger and fresher and more coherent, less eroded. The terror of non-existence dressed up as power and fury. "You don't understand what I am," Tom said. "You're a 16-year-old boy," Harry said, "who found out he had extraordinary gifts and decided that meant he deserved to live forever, and started breaking himself apart to ensure it." He pressed his palm more firmly to Ginny's forehead and felt the ring pour life into her, not a flood, a steady, careful pour, replacing what had been taken. Her pulse strengthened under his hand. "You were a child who was afraid of dying and made every possible wrong choice in response to that fear, and here you are, 50 years later, in a diary that a dying girl is barely sustaining. I am Lord Voldemort. You're Tom Riddle in a notebook," Harry said. "Call yourself whatever you want." The basilisk moved. Tom's focus had frayed enough that the command had leaked through by instinct. It surged forward with the speed that something its size should not have been capable of, closing the space between the statue and Harry in 2 seconds. Harry stood up. He turned to face it and closed his eyes, not because he was afraid, because direct eye contact didn't require sight. The ring's sense already knew exactly where the basilisk was, its enormous ancient pulse clear and immediate. He reached out along that pulse the way he'd reached out to the troll, the way he'd reached out to the dying cat, found the creature beneath the command, the animal beneath the instruction, the genuine living thing that had been created by a Parselmouth 1,000 years ago and given one purpose and had been faithful to it ever since. He spoke, not in English. In Parseltongue, the language the ring had unlocked from his scar, which he'd spent a year learning to use intentionally. He spoke to the basilisk in the language it understood and told it the truth, that its master had been dead for 500 years, that the voice giving it commands was an echo, that its service was fulfilled, that what it had been asked to do tonight was not its fault and would not be required of it again. The basilisk stopped. It was 3 feet from Harry, its head at his level, its eyes half-lidded again, the default that protected people from its gaze. Its tongue tested the air. Its enormous pulse went still and then slowly did something Harry had never felt from a creature before. It relaxed, not threatening, not sleeping, just done. "What are you doing?" Tom said. His voice had shifted, the coherence was cracking, the energy he'd been drawing from Ginny cut off, the inflow of life that was sustaining his manifestation gone. He was becoming translucent at the edges. "What are you doing to it?" "Talking," Harry said, "the way you were supposed to use that gift." He looked at Tom Riddle for the last time. The boy was fading, the memory losing its substance without Ginny's life to feed it, the edges of him becoming suggestion rather than form. His face in the fading became something closer to what it had been before he'd built it into a weapon. Younger, frightened, the face of a child who'd grown up without anyone to show him that the thing he feared most was not worth the price he'd paid to avoid it. "It doesn't have to be like this," Harry said. "It never had to be." "I'm not afraid," Tom said, and his voice was barely sound now. "Yes, you are," Harry said. "It's okay." The memory dissolved. Harry turned back to Ginny. She was breathing properly now. The ring had given back what the diary had taken, the life pulse full and steady. Her color was returning. Her eyelids flickered. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor of the Chamber of Secrets, put her head in his lap, and waited. Death appeared beside him, sitting on the stone floor, looking up at the lost ceiling of the chamber with what appeared to be genuine architectural appreciation. "Nicely done," it said. "She's going to be all right," Harry said. "It wasn't a question. She is," Death confirmed. "The basilisk has fulfilled its purpose. It will not trouble anyone further." Harry looked at the basilisk, coiled at the foot of Slytherin's statue, massive and still and real, a genuine living thing with 1,000 years of history that had been used as a weapon by people who weren't as brilliant as they thought they were. "Can we move it to the forest?" Harry said. "When she's recovered, it shouldn't have to stay down here." Death turned those lightless eyes on him. The expression it wore, if it wore expressions, was the one it reserved for moments when Harry did something that confirmed the choice the ring had made. "Yes," it said, "I'll arrange something." Ginny's eyes opened. She looked up at the ceiling, at the serpent pillars, at the green ambient light. She looked at Harry. "He's gone," she said. "Yes. Did he?" "No," Harry said. "He didn't win. You're fine. You're going to be completely fine." She was quiet for a moment. The chamber breathed around them, ancient and cold, and now, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely empty of anything that shouldn't be there. "Harry," Ginny said. "Yeah, thank you," she said, with the specific directness of someone saying something simple and meaning it entirely. "Of course," Harry said. Above them in the school, in the castle's living pulse, Harry felt Hermione. She'd stayed at the entrance, keeping watch, refusing to leave the tunnel despite not being able to help inside, pacing with a speed that indicated anxiety processed through movement. He felt Ron, somewhere above that, having apparently followed them and gotten stuck at the cave-in further back, and was being very vocal about it based on the vibration pattern of his footsteps. He felt the castle, its ancient warm pulse. He felt the ring on his finger, very still and very warm. He felt the thing in his scar, the Horcrux, the fragment, and turned his attention to it for a moment. It was weaker. The destruction of the diary had taken something from the network. The fragment in his scar was the same fundamental stuff, and the loss of the diary had made it smaller, less coherent, like a fire with less oxygen. He would deal with it, properly, carefully, when he understood it completely. Not yet, but soon. He helped Ginny to her feet. They walked out of the Chamber of Secrets together, and behind them the basilisk lay still in the dark, and the diary's memory was gone, and the chamber was empty of everything that should not have been in it. And Salazar Slytherin's stone face looked down at the place where the boy who had tried to use his legacy had dissolved, and didn't comment, because it was stone, and stone, at least, knows when to keep its opinions to itself. Chapter 6. The Shape of Things that Beau Voldemort came back on a Thursday. Harry knew it was coming 3 days before it happened. The ring told him, not in words, not in vision, but in the specific quality of wrongness that had become familiar over 4 years of feeling it at the edges. The scattered fragments of Voldemort's shattered soul had been assembling, slowly and then all at once, the way water gathers in a low place. The diary was gone. The ring Horcrux was gone. Harry and Dumbledore had retrieved it from the Gaunt shack in March, Harry burning the cold fragment out of the stone with the ring's light, while Dumbledore watched with the expression of a man reprieving someone else's death sentence. The locket, the cup, the diadem, gone, gone, gone. A systematic dismantling spread across 2 years of careful work. Harry and Dumbledore and Hermione's research moving through the list with the methodical efficiency of people who know the shape of a problem and are working it from every angle simultaneously. Nagini was the last Horcrux standing. Voldemort's familiar, made into a vessel sometime in the years of his dispersal, moving with him wherever he was, the final anchor keeping him from true vulnerability. Harry could feel her, the snake's enormous living pulse, warm-blooded in the way of magical serpents who run hotter than their mundane relatives, somewhere in the south of England and moving north with purpose. The 7th Horcrux, the one in Harry's scar, was already gone. He'd removed it himself in February, quietly, in the early morning before breakfast, while Hermione sat in the chair across from him, in the Gryffindor common room with her hands in her lap and her eyes very steady, watching him do the most technically precise thing he'd ever asked the ring to do. It had taken 40 minutes and felt like reaching into a fire with very careful hands and extracting something frozen from the middle of it. The fragment had resisted, not intelligently. It wasn't capable of intelligence on its own, but instinctively, with the animal desperation of something that has been alive for 13 years and does not want to stop. Harry had been patient with it, methodical. He'd worked the ring's light into the edges of it the way you work a key into a rusted lock, slowly, with consistent pressure, feeling every point of resistance and addressing them in order. When it came free, he'd felt it like a physical sensation, a cold thing withdrawing from a warm place, leaving behind a warmth that felt like the absence of something he'd never consciously perceived but had been compensating for his entire life. He'd sat very still for a moment after. "Done," Hermione said. "Done," he said. She let out a breath. "How do you feel?" he considered. "Lighter," he said, "and quieter." There was something in the background, all the time. "I didn't know it was there until it wasn't." She nodded. She was looking at him with an expression that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite something else, but was doing a complicated negotiation between several things. "Good," she said, "then breakfast." "Breakfast," he agreed. They went to breakfast, and Harry carried the dissipated fragment of Voldemort's soul out of himself like a thing that happened and was over, and felt the castle around him cleaner and warmer than it had ever been. The third task of the Triwizard Tournament, which Harry had entered because Dumbledore had asked him to, specifically to have someone present whose perceptions could not be manipulated by dark magic, and whose presence would deter certain forms of interference, and which Harry had navigated with the combination of the ring's senses and 3 years of additional preparation that made most of the tournament's obstacles feel like a very well-themed obstacle course. Culminated on a Thursday evening in June with a maze and a portkey and a graveyard in Little Hangleton. Harry touched the cup at the same moment as Cedric Diggory, which was something he'd anticipated and had discussed with Dumbledore, who had made the calculation that Cedric's presence was a complication, and Harry had made the counter-calculation that it was fine, and they'd argued about it in the specific way they argued now, two people who respected each other's intelligence and disagreed with each other's conclusions, and were honest enough to say so. Cedric is a good person who can handle himself, Harry had said. He's 17 and has no idea what he's walking into, Dumbledore had said. Then I'll make sure he does, Harry said, before we land. The portkey took them in the spinning, nauseating way of portkeys, and Harry grabbed Cedric's arm in the 2 seconds of transit and said, very quickly and very clearly, "Graveyard. Voldemort's return ritual. Stay behind me and do what I say." Cedric, who was Hufflepuff to his core and therefore responded to clear information with immediate and loyal practicality rather than debate, said right in the transit and had his wand out before they landed. They landed in the dark. The graveyard at Little Hangleton was exactly as described in Dumbledore's intelligence: old headstones, long grass, a mausoleum with the name Riddle on it, and a cauldron already lit in the center, its fire casting the kind of light that doesn't make things visible so much as it makes them ominous. Wormtail was there. He squeaked when he saw Harry standing upright and calm with a ring on his finger throwing its own quiet white into the cauldron's orange, which was not what the scenario had called for. In his arms was a small, grotesque thing, not a person, not quite, more the suggestion of one, barely embodied, the remnant of a shattered soul gathered into the minimum viable form it could achieve. Voldemort, in his most diminished state, looking at Harry Potter across a graveyard with the red eyes that were the one consistent thing across every form he'd taken. Harry looked at him. Death appeared at Harry's left shoulder, because this was the sort of moment Death attended not as an observer but as the other party in the equation, and its presence in the graveyard was less metaphorical than usual. "We're going to need a minute," Harry said to Wormtail. Wormtail gaped. "Put him down," Harry said, nodding at the bundle in Wormtail's arms. "Carefully, sit over there." He pointed at a headstone with the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Cedric, watch him." "On it," Cedric said, with the ready reliability of someone who has decided to trust the person who seems to know what's happening and is applying that trust fully. Wormtail, confronted with Harry's voice and Harry's ring, and the white light that was making the graveyard look like it was having sunrise at 9 o'clock at night, put Voldemort's remnant down beside the cauldron with a gentleness born of desperate compliance, and sat against a headstone and did not move. Harry walked toward the cauldron. He crouched beside the remnant, looked at it, felt it through the ring, the gathered fragments, the assembled pieces of a soul that had been broken 7 times and stitched back together in the most hostile possible way, the result less than the sum of its parts, held together by will and rage, and the very specific terror that had driven every decision Tom Riddle had ever made. Nagini was here. He felt her before he saw her, the snake moving through the long grass at the graveyard's edge, drawn to her master by the bond of the Horcrux. She emerged into the cauldron's light and coiled near Harry with her head raised, tasting the air. "Hello," Harry said to her in Parseltongue. She went still. He reached out with the ring's sense and found what he was looking for, the fragment of Voldemort pressed into her, nestled against her spine where the spell had placed it, cold against her warm reptilian life, foreign and wrong in the same way it had been wrong in the diary, in the ring, in the locket, in all of them, a piece of something that had renounced its own nature pressed into something living and using it as shelter. He said to her in Parseltongue, "I'm going to remove something that's been in you for a long time. It's going to feel strange for a moment. Is that all right?" Nagini was a magical serpent and had considerably more cognitive complexity than a mundane one. She looked at him with her golden eyes and made the sound that, in serpent terms, was the closest equivalent to yes. Harry put his hand on her scales. The ring burned white, brighter than it usually burned, brighter than it had burned for anything since the chamber, and Nagini's body went rigid and then released, and the fragment came out of her in the way of something extracted from a place it had occupied too long and dispersed, and the graveyard's cold night air took it. 6, all 6, Nagini blinked. She looked at herself the particular way a snake looks at itself when something that has been part of its experience is no longer there. She tasted the air again. Then, with the decisive self-possession of an animal that has been freed from something and is taking stock of that freedom, she turned and moved through the long grass away from the cauldron and the light, toward the graveyard's wall, and was gone. Harry stood up. He looked at Voldemort's remnant. "Tom," he said. The red eyes opened. They were just eyes in this form, just the eyes and the outline of a face, barely there, the minimum of presence that Voldemort could achieve without a body to inhabit. But the eyes were clear and aware and fully, furiously present. "You destroyed them," Voldemort said. His voice in this form was barely sound, more like a thought that had learned to vibrate air. "All of them." "Yes," Harry said. "How long?" 2 years, Harry said. "Dumbledore and I, Hermione, did most of the research." A silence. The cauldron burned. The graveyard's grass moved in a wind that wasn't cold enough to be October, but had the quality of something that knew it was next to something significant. "You came here," Voldemort said, "knowing what I'd prepared, knowing this was a trap." "Yes." "Why?" Harry sat down on a headstone, old granite, the name worn to illegibility, someone who'd been dead long enough to be comfortable about it, and looked at Voldemort's remnant and said, "Because this is where it ends, and I wanted to give you the chance to choose how." The red eyes narrowed. "Choose." "You have 2 options," Harry said. "The first is what you planned for tonight, the ritual, the restored body, the war you've been building toward since before I was born. I'll tell you honestly how that ends, badly. You have no Horcruxes. You're mortal in a way you haven't been since you were a student at this school. The war you start will end with you dying, and this time it will be complete." "And the second option," Voldemort said, with the precision of someone filing information and disliking the shape of it. "I bring you back," Harry said. Cedric, behind him, said nothing, but his heartbeat spiked significantly. Wormtail made a sound. Voldemort's remnant was very still. "Explain," he said, and the word was stripped of everything except the intelligence underneath it. "The ring," Harry said, "doesn't just take life. It can give it, restore it in the right circumstances and with the right conditions. You could have a body, a real one, not the parasitic restoration you planned tonight." He watched the red eyes. "You'd be mortal, fully mortal. That's not a condition, that's just what it means. The immortality is gone, you burn through it, destroying your soul. What's left is Tom Riddle, which is still, was always, considerably more than most people." "You'd give me life," Voldemort said, with the tone of something testing a statement for its structural integrity. "Out of what? Mercy." "Out of accuracy," Harry said. "Death told me something once, that you've been drowning for 40 years and don't know there's land." He looked at the remnant. "I'm not offering you salvation. I'm offering you the chance to be a person again. What you do with that is yours." The graveyard was very quiet. Far away at the school, Harry could feel the edge of the castle's pulse, too far to feel clearly, just the very edge of it, like hearing music from a distance. He thought about Hermione at the castle, who knew what tonight was and had been in the library for 3 days straight. He thought about Ron and Neville and the Weasley twins and Augusta Longbottom and Mrs. Whitlock, and all the living things whose heartbeats he carried with him always like a second pulse. He thought about his parents, reflected in the mirror. About the warmth and the ache pressed together. He thought about what Death had told him, at the beginning, about doors. "You're afraid," Harry said to Voldemort. "You've been afraid your whole life, and the things you did out of that fear are real and they have consequences, and I'm not asking you to pretend they don't." He paused. "But the fear was always wrong. Death isn't what you thought it was, and you can't know that until you're willing to be mortal enough to find out." The red eyes looked at him across the cauldron's light. "If I refuse," Voldemort said. "Then you're a remnant without Horcruxes," Harry said, "and the natural order reasserts itself, and death does what death does." In the graveyard, Death inclined its long head slightly, which was confirmation of a sort. "I have been in this state," Voldemort said slowly, "for 13 years. I know, cold, barely present, dependent on others for every moment of existence." "Yes, and you're offering to end that." "I'm offering you the chance to end it yourself," Harry said, "by choosing." The remnant was quiet for a long time. The cauldron burned lower. The grass moved. Somewhere in the graveyard, an owl passed overhead. Its wing beats the quiet of something moving through the world with its own purposes entirely, unconcerned with the extraordinary thing happening below. Harry waited. He was very good at waiting. 3 years in Diagon Alley had made him patient in the way that only people with nowhere they have to be urgently can afford to be patient, which was a specific kind of patience, the kind that is actually attention rather than endurance. "Why," Voldemort said finally, "would you trust me?" "I don't," Harry said. "Trust is earned. What I'm offering doesn't require trust, it requires a choice. You make the choice, the ring does the rest. What you do afterward is your responsibility, the way everything you did before was your responsibility, and you live with it the way people live with things they've done." He paused, literally, as a person, with time to make different choices. Another silence longer. And if I harm people, Voldemort said, then the consequences of that exist in a world that is considerably better prepared for you than it was 40 years ago, Harry said, and I will personally be involved in those consequences. But I think, he stopped, looked at the remnant, at the red eyes which had in the course of this conversation lost some of their flatness, had become incrementally something more complex. I think you're tired, Tom. I think you have been tired for a very long time, and the fury and the fear have been covering it. The graveyard, the owl gone now, the cauldron's fire burning low. Yes, Voldemort said very quietly. It was the smallest word Harry had ever heard from him. It sounded like it cost him considerably. Harry stood up from the headstone. He walked to the cauldron. He looked at the remnant, this small, grotesque, barely present thing that had been Lord Voldemort for 40 years and Tom Riddle for 16 before that had shattered itself across 7 vessels trying to outrun the one certainty in the universe, that had destroyed so much in the process of its fear that the destruction had become indistinguishable from the person. He put his hand out. The ring burned white, very white. Brighter than the graveyard, brighter than the cauldron, bright enough that Cedric turned his head away and Wormtail pressed himself against his headstone. White like the inside of a star. White like the first moment of the universe deciding what it wanted to be. It took not long. Minutes, maybe. Time in the ring's light moved with a quality that made duration hard to measure. Harry held his hand steady and let the light do what it did and felt the shape of it through the ring, life being given. Not restored from a template, not reconstructed from memory, made from what was present. From what the remnant was, stripped of its borrowed vessels and its Horcrux anchors and its 40 years of fear-driven accumulation, down to the thing underneath. The thing that had sat in the orphanage and discovered it could make objects move and had felt, for the first time, like the world contained more than it appeared to. The curious boy, the brilliant one, the one who'd read everything in the library and wanted more. Harry gave that boy a body. When the light faded, a man sat on the graveyard grass beside the cold cauldron. Thin, dark-haired, perhaps 30 in appearance, not 16 and not ancient, but somewhere the magic had found on its own, the age that felt honest. His eyes, when he opened them, were dark, not red, dark brown, the original color that Tom Riddle had been born with before the Horcruxes had altered him. He looked at his hands, he looked at Harry. He said nothing for a very long time. Mortal, he said, finally, testing the word. Yes, Harry said. He breathed, in and out, the specific slow breath of someone feeling the weight of a body they haven't fully inhabited for a very long time. He touched the grass beside him with one hand, feeling it. Cold, he said. It's June, Harry said, but it's a graveyard at night. The man who had been Voldemort looked around the graveyard with a clarity in his eyes that had been absent, Harry realized, every other time he'd encountered him. The clarity of someone whose vision has been filtered through so much rage and fear for so long that seeing without those filters was physically different. He looked at the headstones, at Wormtail, who was staring with an expression of pure dumbfounded incomprehension, at Cedric, who was managing his response with admirable composure. He looked back at Harry. What happens now, he said. Now, Harry said, is up to you. There are people who will need to know about this. There are things you'll need to account for, not to me. To the people you harmed. He paused. Dumbledore will want to speak with you. I imagine he will, the man said, with a dryness that was completely Tom Riddle and not at all Lord Voldemort, the humor of someone who has just realized that the most uncomfortable conversation of their life is now compulsory. Are you going to be all right? Harry said. The man looked at him with an expression that suggested this was not a question he had a ready answer for, possibly because no one had asked it before in a context where it was straightforwardly sincere. I don't know, he said. That's honest, Harry said. Good, start there. He turned to Cedric. You all right? Cedric exhaled. That was, yeah, I'm fine. A beat. Is he actually? Yes, Harry said. Right, Cedric said. He looked at the man on the grass with the careful, level assessment of a Hufflepuff processing something unprecedented and arriving at practical acceptance. Do you need a coat? He said to the man. You look cold. The man who had been Voldemort stared at him. Yes, he said after a moment. Actually. Cedric took off his tournament robes. He had a jumper underneath and held them out. The man took them with the specific, careful movements of someone learning that the world can offer things without requiring payment. Harry looked at Wormtail, who had been very still against his headstone throughout all of this, having passed through dumbfounded incomprehension into something closer to existential crisis. You need to turn yourself in, Harry said. Wormtail stared. To the Ministry, Harry said. What you did to the Potters, to Sirius Black, to Cedric's family tonight, you need to account for it. I'm not interested in forcing you, and I'm not going to chase you. He looked at the man on the grass. Your master isn't going to protect you. Your reasons for hiding are gone. He paused. The right thing is to turn yourself in. I think you know that. Wormtail looked at his hands, the silver one, the original one, the hands of a man who had spent 12 years as a rat because the alternative required more courage than he'd had. His face did something complicated and prolonged and ultimately arrived somewhere that was not courage exactly, but was the first movement toward it. He didn't run. Harry portkeyed back to Hogwarts with Cedric and left Wormtail sitting in the graveyard with the instruction that there was a ministry phone number that could be accessed from any magical telephone directory, and the information that he had perhaps an hour before people came to look for the tournament champions, and the situation became publicly complicated. He'd do the right thing or he wouldn't. Harry had made the offer. What Wormtail did with it was Wormtail's. The graveyard had been a Thursday. By Saturday morning, the wizarding world knew that Lord Voldemort was gone, not defeated, not killed, but gone, which was harder to process than either. The ministry's official line went through 4 different versions in 24 hours, as people attempted to find language for something that the language of their world didn't have ready categories for. Fudge went from denial to acceptance to tentative optimistic confusion in approximately 12 hours, which for Fudge was record-breaking cognitive flexibility. Dumbledore's response was more measured and considerably more interesting. He came to find Harry on Saturday morning, not in his office but out on the grounds, where Harry was sitting on the bank of the lake watching the giant squid do its slow contemplative circles in the early summer water. Dumbledore sat beside him, simply sat on the grass, robes and all, in the way of someone who has decided that the appropriate register for this conversation is not formal. They sat together for a moment without speaking. He's with my contacts at the ICW, Dumbledore said. Tom, secure, monitored. He's been cooperative, apparently. Eerily cooperative, according to the Auror who was assigned to him, who described the experience as disconcerting. He's curious, Harry said. Probably for the first time in decades, the fear that was driving everything is it's not gone, but it's not in charge anymore. He looked at the lake. He wanted to live so badly he made himself into something that wasn't really living. Now he's mortal and he's finding out what that actually is. It may not take, Dumbledore said. He made the choices he made, the person he was. People don't simply change because their circumstances do. I know, Harry said. I didn't do it because I thought it would definitely work. I did it because the alternative was killing someone who was already not, who was already barely. He paused. He was a remnant. Killing a remnant isn't a victory. It's just a conclusion. He looked at the squid's tentacle breaking the surface. I'd rather give someone the chance to be a person and see what they do with it than skip to the conclusion. Dumbledore was quiet. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not the one I gave you at the end of your first year. He paused. I spent 10 years building a plan around a boy I expected to be not less than you are, but simpler, more manageable. He was looking at the lake. I designed a war around a weapon that turned out to be a person with considerable opinions about how wars should be conducted. Is that an apology or a complaint? Harry said. Both, Dumbledore said, with the dry humor that appeared in him more frequently now, less managed, more genuine. I am genuinely sorry, Harry, for the Dursleys, for the plan I had for you that would have cost you everything, for the years I spent treating your life as a resource rather than a life. Harry felt the ring warm and steady on his finger. I know, he said. I believe you. He thought about it. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're someone who loves the world very much and got so focused on protecting it that you started making decisions about other people's lives without asking them. He paused. You've been better about that. I have tried to be, Dumbledore said. You have been, Harry said. Give yourself the credit for that. Dumbledore looked at him. Then at his own hands. You have a habit, he said slowly, of seeing people as they are rather than as what they've done. It is either your greatest gift or your most dangerous quality. Probably both, Harry said. Hermione's told me that. She's very perceptive. She's terrifying, Harry said with genuine warmth. In the best possible way. The lake glittered. The squid's tentacle descended. A group of students had come out onto the grounds after breakfast and were scattered across the lawn in the specific arrangement of people who are not in lessons and don't know what to do with the freedom. Harry found Hermione in the crowd by her pulse, bright, always identifiably brilliant, and Ron beside her, and Neville talking to someone from Hufflepuff, and Ginny with her second-year friends, and Cedric at the lake's edge sitting with the specific stillness of someone who has processed something significant and is still working through the last of it. He found all of them, every single person. Albus, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The use of the first name, which Harry had moved to sometime in third year carefully, After Dumbledore had offered it twice and Harry had declined twice and then accepted it the third time when he was ready, still occasionally produced a softening around Dumbledore's eyes. "What do you want to do?" Harry said. Now that the shape of things is different. Dumbledore thought about it seriously, in the way Harry had learned he thought about serious questions, not performing consideration but actually doing it. "I think," he said, "I'd like to teach again, really teach, not manage, not position, not orchestrate." He looked at the students on the lawn. "I have been a very good chess player for a very long time, and it has made me significantly worse at simply being in a room with people." "You could," Harry said. "You're extraordinary when you're actually present for a conversation." "High praise," Dumbledore said, "from someone whose bar for extraordinary is quite literally supernatural." Harry smiled. They sat by the lake in the early summer morning, and Harry felt the world around him. Every heartbeat, every breath, every green growing thing in the grounds, the forest's dense life, the castle's ancient pulse, the lake's cold, enormous depth, the sky above and all the birds in it, felt it all with the ring's permanent, comprehensive awareness. And it was not overwhelming because he'd had years of practice, and it was not lonely because the people he loved were in it, and it was not frightening because he had long ago decided that the world was not something to be afraid of. It was just the world. Alive and complicated and mostly good and sometimes terrible and always, underneath everything, worth understanding. Death appeared at his other shoulder, present but quiet, the way it was when it had nothing to add and simply chose to be nearby, which was, Harry had come to understand, its version of affection. "Busy week," Harry said to no one in particular. Said Death. "Is it over?" Harry asked, and he wasn't asking about the war. He was asking about something larger, the shape of the thing that had been building since before he was born, the long, complicated story that had been written around him before he had words to consent to it. Death considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "That particular chapter," it said. "Yes, what comes next? For you?" Death tilted its long head, and its expression was the nearest to warmth Harry had ever seen it manage. "Whatever you want, you've earned the extraordinary luxury of an unwritten next page." Harry looked out at the lake, at the grounds, at the students on the lawn. He felt Hermione notice him at the lake's edge and start walking toward him with the purposeful warmth of someone who has been monitoring their friend's location for the last hour and has decided enough sitting alone by lakes. "Thank you." He felt Ron look up and then nudge Neville and the two of them following. Felt Ginny's bright second-year pulse moving, felt Cedric already nearby. They were coming toward him. All of them. The people he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back, which was a different thing from being assigned to people or placed with them, or having them arranged around you as pieces, the freely given, specific, chosen thing. He waited for them by the lake, with Death on one shoulder and Dumbledore on the other, and the ring warm on his finger, and the world going on in every direction as far as he could feel it. Hermione reached him first. She sat down on his other side, not Dumbledore's side, Death's side, because Death stood up and relocated with the untroubled ease of something that is not invested in chairs or grass or the social implications of proximity, and didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the lake. "How are you?" she said. Honestly, Harry thought about it. Felt his own pulse, steady, warm his own, no fragments, no parasites, no prophecy pressing down on it, just his. Really good, actually. She looked at him, the measuring look, and then the other one, the one after. "Good," she said, and then, "The ministry's owled. They want a statement about the graveyard." "Of course they do." "Fudge specifically." "Even better." "Harry, I'll do it Monday," he said. "Let me have the weekend." She considered this and found it reasonable and nodded, and Ron arrived with Neville and dropped onto the grass with the comfortable sprawl of someone who has decided this is where he is now, and Neville sat beside him with the quiet contentment of someone who is exactly where they want to be, and Cedric came up from the lake's edge and joined them with the slightly sunstruck look of a person finishing the processing of an enormous week. They sat by the lake. The summer was beginning, really beginning, the kind of summer that stretches ahead with the quality of time that belongs to you. Harry felt it through the ring, every living thing on the grounds calibrating itself to the warmth, the way everything does in early summer, the long, slow, satisfied breathing of a world doing exactly what it was made to do. He felt the castle behind him, its ancient pulse, the professors inside it, the ghosts, the suits of armor and the enchanted portraits and the moving staircases and the rooms that remembered everything that had ever happened in them. He felt the forbidden forest's dense, layered life, the centaurs and the Thestrals and Hagrids' ever-expanding collection of creatures that the wizarding world found alarming and Harry found genuinely interesting. He felt Nagini somewhere in the forest. She'd made it there, living free without the Horcrux, finding her own purposes in the dense green dark. He felt very faintly at the edge of his range, somewhere south, a thin cold presence, not threatening, just present. Tom Riddle, sitting in ICW custody, mortal and strange and alive for the first time in the way that actually counted. What he did with that would be his. Harry had given him the door. Walking through it was the work of a lifetime, and it was entirely his own. Harry, Ron said. Yeah, what actually happened on Thursday, the full version. Cedric's been very calm about it, which is suspicious. I'm calm because Harry was calm, Cedric said. It's contextually appropriate. He walked into a graveyard, talked to the remnant of the most evil wizard in a century, brought him back to life and made him mortal, Hermione said, with the brisk precision of someone who has had several days to find the right summary. Then he offered Wormtail the chance to turn himself in. Then we came home. Silence. Right, Ron said. That's the full version is somehow less informative than I expected. He also talked to Nagini, Cedric added. In Parseltongue she left. Voluntarily, Harry said. She was free, she went. And death was there, Hermione said. Death is usually there, Neville said, with the equanimity he'd developed over 4 years of proximity to Harry. I've stopped tracking that specifically. I find that extremely healthy, Harry said. Ron looked at him. The look he had that was different from the others, not Hermione's measuring precision, not Neville's quiet acceptance, but Ron's particular look, the one that was entirely honest and had no performance in it at all. Are you actually all right? Ron said. Because last Thursday, you essentially ended a 4-decade magical war and gave the bloke who killed your parents a second chance at life, and you're sitting here like you went on a slightly long errand. Harry thought about it. He looked at the ring on his finger, its quiet, steady pulse, neither celebrating nor solemnizing, just present. He thought about his parents in the mirror and the warmth and the ache. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs, the bare bulb, the screaming face not in the wood, and the thin line of white light bleeding up through the floorboard. He thought about how far from that cupboard he was sitting. Yeah, he said, I actually am. Ron looked at him for another moment, then nodded with the finality of someone who has assessed the truth of a statement and accepted it. Good, he said. Now can we please talk about something completely normal for a while, because I have had an extraordinary week vicariously, and I'd like to hear about something that isn't either dark magic or metaphysics. Fred and George are testing a new product that apparently makes your ears work backwards, Neville said. Heard you say things before you say them. That's not metaphysics, Cedric said. It's just regular chaos, Neville said. Different category. I'll take it, Ron said. They talked. The morning went. The sun moved across the sky in the slow, certain way it had been moving since before there were people to watch it and would keep moving long after, and Harry sat in the middle of all of it, the conversation and the lake and the castle and the forest and the friends, and felt the world's heartbeat, all of it, as clearly as he always did, as he always would. The ring on his finger was warm. Death sat at the lake's edge, its long feet in the water, looking across at the far shore with the patience of something that has nowhere it needs to be. And Harry Potter, who had been born to be a weapon and had declined the appointment, who had grown up in a cupboard and learned to call death a companion, who had been chosen by a ring older than most of the world's stories, and had spent 4 years figuring out what it had seen in him. Harry Potter sat in the June morning with the people he loved and felt, in his bones and his blood and the quiet white warmth on his finger, that this was what the ring had always been leading toward. Not power, not dominion. Not the authority over life and death that people assumed it meant. Just this. The unremarkable, extraordinary, irreplaceable fact of being alive in a world full of living things and knowing, all the way down, what that was worth. He closed his eyes, every heartbeat, every breath, every green thing growing. The castle and the forest and the lake and the sky and the people, his people, talking beside him about ears that work backwards and Fred and George's commercial instincts, and whether the giant squid has preferences about the weather. All of it his, not to own. To understand, he opened his eyes. The summer was beginning.